Reborn as the Viking pirate king. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 501, Concubines' Origin, 3. The two Confucian scholars were no fools. After repeatedly provoking 3 different factions, they also noticed a significant increase in the number of enemies within the palace. However, their lack of political experience meant they only recognized the danger, but failed to perceive the murderous intent hidden behind it. In the eyes of the two princes, their most powerful card was still Emperor Shunzong of Tang, Li Song, who had invited them to Chang'an after 3 visits to his thatched cottage. Making enemies was not a big deal, as reforms inevitably create enemies. The crucial thing now was to seize Li Song's military power, which meant the 3,000 imperial guards stationed in Chang'an. However, it was at this point that reality taught the two Confucian mentors a harsh lesson. Li Song did indeed grant them the title of commander of the imperial guards. In name, they were indeed the highest commanders of the army. They received the fiery red official robes and cold iron swords worthy of higher-ranking generals. But that was all. The two princes were shocked to discover that a mere letter of appointment from the emperor could not secure the loyalty of the army overnight. Li Song could only grant them a position. He couldn't earn the genuine support of the armored soldiers. He was merely a mortal. He wasn't a god. The army's ultimate choice would be the one who paid them the gold. The eunuchs and officials dared to resist the extortionate swordsmen of Chang'an precisely because they paid sufficient tribute to the imperial guard. On one side were the generous eunuchs, and on the other, the desperate Confucian teachers who had taken the seal of prime minister and were determined to eliminate all corrupt officials one by one. The junior officers knew this clearly. When the birds are gone, the bows are put away. When the rabbits are dead, the dogs are cooked. If he transformed himself into a sharp sword and eliminated his corrupt superiors, once they fell, the butcher's knife would be swung down on his own heads. After all, while the officials feasted on meat, he and his peasant brothers enjoyed the spoils. Loyalty was a no-brainer. Without an army, the Confucian scholars were like children walking into a wolf's den. Once fear gripped their hearts, they opened their eyes again to find enemies everywhere. Just then, Concubines emerged from the mountains, treading on the drizzling rain. Her mentor's first assignment was to eliminate Emperor Shunzong of Tang, Li Song, and prepare the way for Li Chun, the next emperor designated by the legalist mentors as Emperor Xianzong of Tang, to ascend the throne. Concubines took the documents, briefly flipped through them, and tossed the pages into the fire. She already had a plan. Concubines chose not to enter Chang'an. Instead, she journeyed south to Wang Shuwen's hometown, to the thatched cottage where he taught Confucianism. On a dark and windy night, after all the Confucian scholars had fallen asleep, Concubines slipped into the Wang family mansion like a silent bat, extracted a pre-prepared potion, and breathed it into the mouth of the Queen Mother. The next day, the Queen Mother was critically ill, with only 10 days to live. Though only 16, Concubines possessed unparalleled assassin instincts. Even a centipede dies, its limbs cleave to the bone. Though the Eastern Tang dynasty was fading, the positions of the left and right prime ministers remained supreme. Second only to the emperor and surpassing all others, unattainable by ordinary men. Rather than entering the palace to fight a sword immortal, it would be better to exploit the Confucian school's greatest weakness, their cherished filial piety. Indeed, upon hearing of his mother's illness, Wang Shuwen felt compelled to return, even though the reforms, barely 4 months old, were in jeopardy. With a single packet of medicinal powder, Concubines eliminated Li Song's most ferocious enemy. The next step was to eliminate the other of the two princes, the left prime minister, Wang Yi. Concubines entered Chang'an amidst a gentle breeze and drizzling rain. The next night, Wang Yi, riding a memorial in the Hanlin Academy, suddenly let out a shriek and was carried home that same night by eunuchs. It was said that upon his return, his speech was slurred and his body was trembling, as if he had suffered a stroke. After examining the man's pulse, the imperial physician determined the cause of his illness was illness caused by overwork. The next day, he was taken from Chang'an by his students and returned home to recuperate. Thus, the reforms later known as the Yongzhen reforms were declared a failure after just 5 months. The Confucian scholars' failure was doomed from the moment they entered the imperial palace. They were defeated before they even entered Chang'an, and from the moment Emperor Shenzong of Tang, Li Song, ascended to the throne. From the moment the mute and disabled emperor ascended the throne, the Confucian scholars had already made a grave mistake. In this situation, the two princes desperately trusted to their own righteousness, dreaming of the Confucian ideal of ruling the world with benevolence and righteousness. Little did they know that these stories were all illusions, dramatized by theatrical tropes. The story of Liu Bei entering the mountains and summoning a free-spirited herder, who, upon emerged as a god and dominated the world's counselors, a scenario that would never have occurred in the real world. Throw two upright and moral figures into a group of slippery, cunning politicians, and the most likely outcome is that they'll be beaten to the point of utter destruction. By contrast, the legalist politicians were far more shrewd. While they were all trying to save the country, unlike the upright Confucian scholars, the legalist politicians understood the true nature of the game. Throw a frog into boiling water and it will jump out without hesitation. But throw it into cold water and simmer it gently. Not just one frog, but an entire pod of frogs won't have any room to escape. With the two queens eliminated, Li Song, who suffered a stroke and lost his voice, no longer had any means to counter the ruthless officials left behind by Emperor Dezhen. On the 9th day of the 8th month of the first year of Xian'ai, Emperor Xianzong Lichun, the successor nominated by the legalist politicians, was proclaimed emperor. This was less than 8 months after Emperor Dezhen's death and Emperor Shenzong's ascension to the throne. This event was unprecedented in the 200-year history of the Tang dynasty. On the first day of the first lunar month in 806 AD, Emperor Xianzong of Tang, Lichun, led civil and military officials to Xingqing Palace to congratulate his father and present him with the title of Shengshao Yingqian, wishing the retired emperor a life of longevity. However, as the new emperor and his officials waited outside the palace gates, eagerly awaiting Li Song's arrival, they were met with news that the retired emperor had died suddenly in his sleep. Rushing into the room, the guards and maids trembled in fear, completely bewildered as to what had happened. A short while later, the imperial physician brought the old emperor's body back to the imperial forest garden for a thorough examination, but could find no wounds. Ultimately, the only conclusion was that he had died of natural causes, having passed away on a crane. This was concubine Zhu's first act after emerging from seclusion. Her work was so accomplished that even the legalists were at a loss to explain how she had gained entry to the palace, guarded by the Dalao Jingxin, and how she had quietly eliminated the old emperor. So when his body was discovered, concubine Zhu had already walked nearly 300 miles out of Chang'an City, and returned quietly to the gate of the Assassin Academy in the golden wind and drizzle. Chapter 502, Concubine Zhu's Origin, 4. After successfully expelling all Confucian scholars from the court and eliminating their supporters, the old Wang and the legalist scholars looked at the group of fat but idle parasites around them with a relieved smile. The reforms had failed, and the people were still suffering. That's right. If the people weren't suffering, what would happen if they all fled to the Western continent with their families, just like those fat merchants? The nations of the Western continent revered the mysterious East as if it were a myth. Any East continent face with yellow skin, black hair, black eyes, and the ability to speak fluent Chinese would be respected by the lords in any city of the Western continent. Even idlers without any livelihood skills could survive by teaching a few words of Chinese. Even after the tragedy of the Lushan Rebellion, the Eastern Tang dynasty remained a golden land coveted by many Western nobles. Sending one's children into the Byzantine pantheon was not a special achievement. Entering the Tang dynasty's imperial academy is a testament to the talent of the elite. The turmoil following the Anshu rebellion has drained the Eastern Tang of its vast talent pool. If even more people choose to migrate to the Western continent, the kingdom will immediately face a dire situation where no one can support them. This must not happen. The legalist rulers allow corrupt officials to continue living the life they long for. They know full well that every penny these bastards embezzle now will be theirs in the future. For now, they can allow them to levy heavy taxes and taxes freely. Once the feudal lords are successfully weakened, they can turn around and wipe out these parasites. This is far more satisfying than suffering the pain of exploiting the people. It not only expands the treasury, but also aligns with public opinion. This is the quality a politician in troubled times should possess. In August of the first year of the Yongzhen reign, Emperor Xianzong of Tang, Li Chun, ascended the throne. That same month, Wei Gao, the governor of Sichuan, passed away. His trusted confidant, Liu Pai, assumed power as if he had inherited the throne. The newly ascended Emperor Xianzong of Tang, considering his new accession to the throne and the recent death of the previous emperor, felt completely lost. He considered a temporary appeasement measure, appointing Liu Pai as deputy Jidashi, acting as Jidashi. Liu Pai, viewing this as a sign of weakness, immediately pressed the issue, submitting a petition in the first month of the first year of the Tang dynasty, demanding the concurrent control of the three rivers, Sichuan, Dongchuan, and Shannon West Road. This was more than a defiance of imperial authority, it was a blatant challenge to Xianzong's bottom line. Li Chun assembled his legalist politicians, and after less than an hour of deliberation, concubine Zhu received her second mission, to assist the court in eliminating Liu Pai, the Jidashi of western Sichuan. 7 days later, 4 of Liu Pai's 5 generals died of illness. On the 10th day, he discovered his wives and concubines tragically murdered, and his 3 young sons thrown into a well. Despite commanding millions of men, despite having already surrendered Zizhao and captured Li Kang, the Jidashi of eastern Sichuan, Liu Pai remained gripped by boundless fear. With key generals dying one after another, his army, leaderless, immediately fell into chaos. After 8 victories, the Tang army saw its situation hopeless. Liu Pai prepared to flee to Tibet, but unexpectedly, while staying at a farmer's house at night, 4 of his nascent soul sword cultivators were tragically killed. He was taken back to Chang'an. 7 days later, his entire family was executed. The second battle was a brilliant one, and the third and fourth followed. In March of the first year of the Yuan reign, after the abdication of Han Quanai, the governor of Jiasu, he instigated his nephew, Yang Hulin, to rebel. Zhang Chengjin, the military commander of Jiasu, assassinated Yang Hulin and brought his head to Chang'an. In September of the second year of the Yuan reign, Li Qi, the governor of Zhenhe, rebelled. However, before the battle even began, his nephew joined forces with the military commander of Zhenhe and others in rebellion. In November, Li Qi and his son were brought to Chang'an and beheaded. Concubine Zhu's understanding of the word assassin exceeded the expectations of her legalist mentors. In the common sense, an assassin approaches their target, draws their sword, kills, and then retreats, hiding their identity. Concubine Zhu believed that this method of action by her predecessors was unwise. Any wound on a corpse would inevitably lead to insightful individuals who could infer the victim's nemesis from their background and deduced that it was a vendetta. However, in the cases of concubine Zhu's victims, aside from their eventual deaths, no one could even definitively say whether she had taken any action. Did she poison Wang Shuwen's mother? Perhaps, and perhaps not. After all, she was old, and accidents could happen. Similarly, was Wang Yi's death in the Hanlin Academy definitely at her hands? Strokes caused by cerebral congestion can be fatal in any era, especially for imperial aides who engage in long-term mental work and face constant pressure. The following deaths were even more remarkable. Emperor Shenzong of Tang, Li Song, had no wounds on his body, and the imperial physician declared him to have died of natural causes, without illness. Liu Pai suffered no harm from beginning to end, all who perished were his generals and relatives. In the end, driven mad and hysterical, he was escorted back to the capital by an ordinary old woodcutter. As for Li Qi, he was simply defeated by a mutiny among his subordinates. Even the legalist scholars couldn't definitively explain concubine Zhu's role in the aftermath. The only pattern they could discern was that whenever a mission was issued, these rebellious princes would inevitably encounter unexpected events within 10 days. As one can imagine, outsiders were even more baffled by the pattern behind each of these vassal princes' failures. In the eyes of the scholars, concubine Zhu's ambitions transcended the school's ancient definition of assassin. She seemed to be taking this mysterious profession to an even more unknown level. Like an antelope hanging by a horn, it leaves no trace. Using her solely to resolve disputes among mortal royal families was a sheer waste of talent. The rise of the legalists greatly broadened the worldview of this ancient school of thought. The instructors understood that despite being only 20 years old, concubine Zhu's abilities were more than sufficient to support him in completing more complex foreign missions involving complex international situations. In the 4th year of Emperor Xianzong's reign, 809 AD, the Tang dynasty's internal efforts to reduce the influence of the feudal lords were gradually gaining momentum. With the downfall of Liu Pai and Li Qi, The remaining vassal kings were increasingly concerned. With the internal crisis of the Tang dynasty temporarily alleviated, and with the advent of another round of rejuvenation, concubine Zhu, a powerful weapon, naturally needed to be deployed to the more complex underbelly to resolve greater challenges for the court. Her first mission was to lead a team to infiltrate the Illuminati. Chapter 503, Concubine Zhu's Origin, 5. The Anxi Rebellion of 755 AD was an unprecedented catastrophe. Not only did it severely damage the power of the Tang dynasty, once known as the king of all nations, but years of war also cost a kingdom nearly 30 million lives and nearly half its territory. This devastating blow completely sobered the Tang dynasty, which had been obsessed with its celestial empire. Confucian scholars persisted in their belief that Emperor Xuanzang's misfortunes were due to women, and that all the calamities were caused by the imperial concubine. During their escape, they insisted that Emperor Xuanzang execute Yang Yuhun, as if all the country's woes stemmed from this 28-year-old woman. At the time, the legalist masters had not yet ascended to power, and they watched the events unfold with a cold eye. From that moment on, they knew the demise of Confucianism was inevitable. In the heyday of prosperity, the elegantly spoken literati, wielding feather fans and robes, brought the nation considerable prestige. But as the empire crumbled, they still sought to apply the literati's ways, vainly attempting to save the country with the virtues of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trustworthiness. This simply wasn't realistic. A 1,000-mile embankment crumbles in a single anthole. For a stable kingdom to crumble overnight, a group of individuals must have made incredible efforts in secret. During the reigns of Emperors Dezong and Dezan, the legalists gathered strength and gradually emerged in the court's struggle for power. Gradually gaining the kingdom's favor and support, they used secret talks, spies, and even the influence of Zoroastrianism to uncover an organization known as the Illuminati. Initially, the legalists were unsure that a secret society, passed down by word of mouth among a small elite, was the root cause of the kingdom's calamity. However, as more and more Illuminati members surfaced, in 797 AD, the Norman lord Loki Starliger led the Frost Giants in an assault on France. They engaged Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea, in Paris, completely exposing the Illuminati's lizard-men disguise. The legalists' agents hidden in Paris gazed in astonishment at the moving mountain and the nearly 100-meter-tall giant of light. They were almost certain that the Illuminati had the capability to instigate the Anlushan rebellion. Peripheral members provided services to the secret society in various covert ways. In return, the Illuminati would grant them nearly limitless wealth, ancient relics left behind by various gods, and even direct power. To immediately confront an enemy upon identifying them would be utterly foolish. The legalist mentors observed their opponents from the shadows, sensing a similar aura to themselves. For centuries, legalist mentors had long hidden in the shadows of the arrogant Confucian scholars. While these scholars recited contemporary poetry to the blonde, blue-eyed Westerners from the halls of high esteem, legalist assassins lurked in the shadows, wielding their sharp blades to eliminate all ill-intentioned foreigners. While the Confucian scholars read memorials in the imperial court, legalist assassins, clad in straw raincoats and straw sandals, disguised themselves as ordinary Easterners, quietly carrying out their undercover missions assigned by their superiors. The facade of preaching and resolving doubts is to preach, the inner workings are to clean up the mess. The facade of entertaining guests is to bury the dead. The legalist mentors have been serving the kingdom's inner circle for so long that only they can truly understand the formidable adversary the Illuminati presence. As the Tang dynasty's power wanes, direct confrontation is unwise. The mentors decided to first try to understand this adversary. Over the decades, they have planted more than a dozen spies through various channels to serve as peripheral members of the Illuminati. The legalist mentors are well versed in the laws of warfare on the secret battlefield. Their spies include those from the East, those from the West, and even a few hidden and powerful individuals from small, marginalized nations. The deeper they delve into the Illuminati, the more they sense the mystery and power of this secret society. It's like a giant iceberg floating on the surface. What's above the surface is immense. What's beneath the surface is even more terrifying. Sending concubine Zhu into the Illuminati offers several unique advantages. First, to most people, she's a complete stranger. Few people even within the legalist school knew of concubine Zhu's existence, let alone outsiders. Secondly, she possessed considerable personal strength. The first step for a peripheral member of the Illuminati was to be introduced by another member who also served the order. With so many members already lurking within the order, it wasn't difficult for a legalist mentor to help concubines who complete the first step. The second step was to complete a mission assigned by the sovereign leader. In the Eastern continent, this was commonly known as taking the Pledge of Allegiance. In this round of testing, the Illuminati assigned concubine Zu the task of successfully transporting a 5-year-old girl across the desert to the Styx priest in the Mia oasis. While seemingly simple, this task presented two challenges. First, the girl was currently in the possession of the Hangchang ship, a vessel of the Tang Dynasty Chamber of Commerce. The shareholders behind the Hangchang ship were also attempting to transport the girl to the northern continent. To seize her, concubine Zu would have to slaughter her own kind. The Illuminati's first test usually required assessing a member's resolve to renounce their past. Killing one's own comrades was never easy for the Confucian-minded people of the Eastern continent. Yet, for the followers of the legalists, this wasn't a problem. To be frank, ever since concubine Zu entered the mountains to cultivate, all those who died at her hands were her compatriots. This was true even of strangers, let alone the wealthy merchants who had fled. When the country was at peace, they exploited its prosperity to amass vast sums of wealth. When the country fell into trouble, instead of offering a helping hand, they fled with their vast fortunes to the Western continent, continuing their extravagant lifestyle. Once stability returned to the country, concubine Zu could easily predict their fate. Even without the Illuminati's demands, the legalist assassins would naturally eliminate these blood-sucking parasites. Ideology wasn't a problem, but the execution still required careful consideration. If they stormed the Hangchang headquarters like that group of Turkic thugs, it would be too blatant. Concubine Zu employed her signature chasing the tiger and devouring the wolf tactic, passing the message ahead to the Arab merchants. Whichever side emerged victorious would ultimately be weakened upon entering Memphis. By that time, it would be much easier for her to take action. Chapter 504, The Caravan Enters the City. The Crescent Moon Chamber of Commerce is late. Returning to her room, concubine Zu put down the book of Lord Shong and simultaneously pulled out two thin, transparent daggers from her sleeves. The daggers were about a foot long, without hilts or sheaths. An ordinary person wouldn't even be able to tell where to hold them. Yet, concubine Zu managed to conceal the two transparent daggers close to her body. This was because she had carried these thin blades close to her body since she was 6 years old. Legalist assassins were not Taoist swordsmen. For swordsmen, their primary purpose in inducing and tempering the body was to gain longer life and perfect their cultivation. Cultivating and attaining the Tao were the primary priorities of the Tang Dynasty swordmasters. Killing was not the goal of their cultivation, but merely a means to an end. Conversely, legalist assassins were taken into the mountains by their mentors from a young age, where they diligently trained day and night in the art of killing. Their sole purpose in life was to eliminate their mentors' enemies at the right time, in the right place, and with the right method. Killing was their sole raison d'etre. They live and die for killing. Flying swords may seem impressive, but for assassins, a sword cultivator suspended in midair is too conspicuous and conspicuous. Assassins need precise and silent elimination. The sweeping movements of flying swords clearly fall short. Daggers, poisons, and hidden blades are more suitable for covert operations. The normal appointment time is tonight. We've already explained all the precautions to these filthy, greasy cannibals. If they still can't defeat 5 giant sword cultivators under the cover of the wind and sand, I can only say they're completely unworthy of our cooperation. The hotel room, constructed of snow-white marble, had extremely high ceilings. Besides concubine Zu, there were 3 other figures sitting or standing inside. The one who had just spoken was a young woman, probably about 20 years old. She wore a dark green, double-breasted gown. Judging by her appearance, she might be concubine Zu's maid. However, secretly, she was a master poisoner. Within the legalist assassins, her codename, Green Eyebrow, sounds harmless at first, even suggesting poison. This aligns with the Order's fundamental principle of concealing their identities at all costs. They'll only be trapped by the sandstorm for a few days at most. We made a careful assessment before setting out. Given the combat capabilities of the Crescent Moon Trading Company's cavalry, no trading company on this route could withstand their onslaught. The second speaker was an elderly man in his 50s, his hair and beard slightly gray. He wore an exquisite butler's uniform, and his true expertise lay in providing accommodation, cooking, and procuring the necessary supplies. In theatrical drama, A lone hero penetrates a dangerous den, stealthily closing in on their target at the opportune moment before striking a fatal blow. However, in the real world, nothing is accomplished so smoothly. Scripts depict only the assassin's vengeance against their enemies. Beyond that, all other trivialities remain unmentioned. In reality, the greatest daily challenge for an assassin team in a foreign land is simply finding food and shelter. Should one disguise himself as a noble and make a high-profile entrance? Or disguise himself as a lowly commoner and blend in with the crowd? It sounds simple, but it involves a vast array of technical details. Failure to manage any aspect of logistics could lead to numerous mishaps during the operation. The butler, codenamed Tankai, is unknown, except that he is one of the most senior members of the legalist assassin order. Tankai doesn't kill. But everyone has their specialties, and he only needs to excel at what he does best. Tankai is a unique butler. He speaks 29 languages and is a master of disguise. He always keeps over 20 human skin masks in his bag, and he can expertly use the modest disguise technique to transform anyone into the desired appearance in under 3 minutes. He is also a master of disguise. Once disguised, he can mimic the appearance, accent, and even lifestyle of natives from all over the world. No one can blend in more quickly than him, giving him an unparalleled advantage in finding his way, gathering intelligence, purchasing supplies, and connecting with undercover agents. The fourth person was different from Concubine Zu and the other two. He was a blonde, blue-eyed Visigoth. Friendly treatment of foreigners might be the only commonality between the Confucian and legalist schools. However, their starting points were different. Confucian scholars aspired to spread the Confucian ideal of love others, love yourself to every corner of the world. Therefore, for most of the Tang dynasty's reign in the East, Chang'an maintained an open attitude toward those of blonde, blue-eyed ethnicity. Westerners, Indians, Arabs, Japanese, and even Kunlun slaves, who passed the imperial examinations, could study at the Imperial Academy and even serve as officials. All official positions below the chancellor were open to non-Chinese. Un Lushan, a Sogdian who rose directly to the rank of Jirashi thanks to his mastery of the Huixuan dance and his seemingly foolish flattery, a testament to this. In the eyes of the legalists, everyone in the world was a lamb to be driven and exploited, regardless of their origin, race, or faith. They were all weapons to be exploited. For a disciple of the legalist school, the ultimate joy is to use an outsider to eliminate an outsider. Consequently, the legalist school's assassin academy is always filled with outsiders. This Visigoth youth, named Heath Blanche, also hails from the legalist school, having graduated 2 years before Concubine Zu. He has long lurked in the Western continent, awaiting the call of his mentors. The fundamental principle of assassin operations is alternating between covert and open operations, providing mutual cover. Even the most meticulously planned missions, in a Western continent teeming with members of the flame-spreading gang, can still lead to leaks. To mitigate this, the assassin order requires that each operation be conducted in pairs, one in the open, the other in the dark. Heath Blanche serves as Concubine Zu's cover. Normally, the two pretend to have no contact, acting like strangers. Once a mission begins, Heath and Concubine Zu approach their target simultaneously. If Heath is exposed, he will do everything in his power to create chaos, creating an opening for Concubine Zu to strike. Similarly, if Concubine Zu was unable to act or was forced to withdraw, Heath Brancher would be the backup option. Friends of the East Continent, please remain calm. Heath, a mere 22 years old with blonde hair and blue eyes, possessed a sunny, handsome demeanor, like all residents of the free cities of the Visigoths, with a cheerful and casual demeanor. You may be new to this unfamiliar continent, but I've been here for years. Believe me, even without the intelligence you provide, these mad Vulcan worshippers will seek every opportunity to fight the Tang people to the death. Haha, how long have you been enjoying the title of Celestial Empire? You have no idea how desperately these lunatics want to trample you underfoot. Concubine Zu was about to speak when she suddenly felt a strange burning sensation in her chest. In this operation, she was a Tang noble. As a noble, she naturally wore the open-chested silk gowns common to Tang women, exposing her prominent chest and snow-white arms. Concubine Zu, a former assassin, disliked this attire, especially after feeling the blazing gaze of this Western lecher. She instinctively tried to hide the cleavage of her throws. But she couldn't. The lion had aged, but its might remained, even though the Tang dynasty no longer held the dominance it once held. Her status as a young lady from an imperial family remained a golden signboard, granting her unimpeded access to any land. Now, she was a young lady from the Eastern Tang dynasty, entering Memphis to purchase the mercury potion from the Styx priests, seeking eternal youth. A normal young lady from an imperial family wouldn't shy away from male gazes, so she had to learn to adapt. The young woman blushed, but Heath, in turn, sat upright. Working in the same department, he had heard a great deal about concubine Zhu's exploits. Despite her fair complexion and even a hint of baby fat on her round face, she was more dangerous than many of the gang's most renowned assassins. Ding-ling! A faint bell chimed from afar. Heath held up a finger, closed his eyes, and listened intently. Listen, concubine Zhu once again snatched up the glass dagger from the round table and tucked it into her sleeve. She stepped onto the balcony, only to watch as the city gate, once about to close, was once again pulled open by soldiers. The melodious sound of camel bells echoed. A caravan of camels, endless in sight, passed through the gate and into Memphis. Chapter 505, The Caravan Enters the City, 2. After 2 days of sleepless, restless journeys, the Hashma caravan finally arrived at the ancient desert city of Memphis in the fading light of sunset. This desert city was built around 2300 BC. Its prototype originated from the tents used by slaves and construction workers during the construction of the Giza pyramids. The 3 pyramids took 100,000 slaves 30 years to build. After 30 years, the pyramids were completed. But after 100,000 people had lived there for so long, the beginnings of a city had already begun to take shape near the pyramids. In the spirit of making the most of his resources, the pharaoh left 100,000 slaves to build and live in the city. Thus, the city of Memphis was born. Despite the hardships, no one complained during the journey. Having amassed such a large treasure through unpredictable means in the desert, while the yellow sand would obscure their tracks, the 50 men in the caravan would still be in great danger if they encountered a large caravan from another country in the riverbed. Therefore, they had to move quickly. As they crossed the riverbed through the thick sand, the wind and sand became thinner as they approached the city. Though everyone was dusty and a bit exhausted, they still held their torches high and cheered as the 2 massive gates of Memphis appeared before them. Having delivered over 100 carts of goods to the city, the Hashma gang's gamble was already halfway won. All major merchant guilds along this route ultimately sought the desert city of Memphis. Once inside, they would transport their goods to the guild's dedicated warehouses, where they would then trade with the desert freemen. No major merchant guild chose to venture deeper into the Black Desert. Although entering the freemen's villages offered better goods, the high casualty rate and the potential for accidents along the way discouraged the major merchant guilds. Those who dared to enter the Black Desert were impoverished people with nowhere else to go, like the Hashma gang. Unable to carry large amounts of goods, they simply sought to maximize their profits. Compared to the major merchant guilds, the Hashma gang was negligible in size. But carrying such a large amount of goods into the city, he would inevitably attract the attention of all the city's merchants. Old Hash, a veteran of the street, knew that hiding was impossible in such a situation. Pretending to be pretentious would only expose his true intentions, so he decided to march in with a dignified demeanor. He commanded his cavalry as they marched through the broad streets of Memphis, their heads held high. The Royal Academy of Constantinople, my God, in this day and age, are the scholars of the academy also doing business? Aren't they supposed to? Before the apprentice could finish his words, the master beside him immediately reached out his palm, as big as a palm fan, and slapped him hard on the back of his head. Tisk tisk, too much nonsense, look at all those carts of goods. For the past decade or so, there's been rumors that the scholars of the Royal Academy have begun to emulate the Eastern Tang dynasty and win over scholars from all over the world. Despite their powerlessness, their status is rising year by year. I've heard rumors that they've even begun to enter the Byzantine Senate, gaining the power to influence national policy. We'll see, in another 10 or 20 years, they might even be able to shake the church's dominance. At this, the master lowered his head and sighed softly. Business in this city has been bleak in recent years. I don't know where the freedmen have gone. I hope the scholars' investigations can save us. Although Memphis, nestled in the desert, may be isolated, its numerous merchants make it a well-informed place. The owner of the Chamber of Commerce, standing at the doorway, patiently and enthusiastically explained science to his apprentices. Old Hash, who was passing by, almost laughed out loud. Removing the Hashma gang sign from the side of the wagon and painting it with the Royal Academy Night Owl logo was a last-minute idea he came up with before entering the city. As the old saying goes, it's nice to find shade under a big tree. Memphis, nestled on the edge of the desert, was far from a livable city known for its simple folk and good public security. With only his 50 men, protecting over 100 carts of valuable goods was a formidable task. Fierce freemen, small caravans whose goods had been lost along the way, even the Ramses patrols stationed in the city could all threaten him on this dark and stormy night. If it were discovered that the Hashma gang had scavenged over 100 carts of goods from the desert by sheer luck, thieves abounded in this lawless city, ready to steal their goods unnoticed. Therefore, he had to find a way to maintain his reputation. The scholars of the Royal Academy of Constantinople, waiting for him in the city, were his best support. Why does this cavalry look so strange? Yes. How could the arrogant Byzantine scholars find a group of Arab merchants as porters? I once passed by the Royal Academy of Sciences and saw many scholars from the East China Sea wearing badges on their chests walking in the university. The Roman scholars have such a good relationship with the Tang people, even if they want to find someone, they will hire Tang swordsmen. Also, where did these bearded men buy the Tang people's plow carts? Is this kind of cart also used by barefoot merchants like Old Ash? In the Byzantine Empire, the skyrocketing prices of black desert goods were directly reflected in every business owner in the city. The sluggish business left many shop owners idle. Despite this, no one chose to leave. Part of the reason was undoubtedly the exorbitant prices of the goods sold by the freemen, each believing that if they could outlast their competitors, they would be the ones to strike it rich. Another reason was that the city's major merchant guilds had simultaneously stockpiled vast quantities of daily necessities. Without the freemen buying, they were forced to sell them cheaply to other merchants. After all, they couldn't bear to see the food, salt, and wine they had painstakingly transported into the desert go to waste. Therefore, the residents of Memphis were not starving. Most of the merchants who could cross the desert to Memphis possessed basic foresight. As more and more merchants emerged from the inns onto the streets, chattering and pointing, Moffing and the porters behind him involuntarily quickened their horses' pace. Indeed, as the merchants had said, a closer look revealed numerous flaws within this group. "Slow down, why are you in such a hurry?" Hash gritted his teeth and whispered to his men. "The calmer we are, the less likely these guys will be able to see our flaws. If we panic, it will only make people suspicious." Hash knew in his heart that their weakness would not exist forever. As long as they entered the Shahu Inn in the city and contacted the Byzantine scholars, as long as the two sides were together, they would be temporarily safe. Don't forget that at this time, the two large chambers of commerce, New Moon Trading Company and Hangcheng, were also waiting for the arrival of the caravan. They might not be suspicious within 3 to 5 days, but after a long time, they would definitely suspect Hash. By that time, there would be more than a dozen blonde and blue-eyed Romans in Hash's team, which was more direct than any words. Hash was not afraid of the other two chambers of commerce. His real fear came from the East Land woman who was waiting for the contact with the New Moon Chamber of Commerce. In a foreign country, this woman dared to unite with a mortal enemy of the Tang dynasty and swallow up the goods of her own Chamber of Commerce. Such a person must be a cruel and unscrupulous villain. Hash had a hunch that the goods might not be what she wanted. The real target of this East Land woman was most likely the East Land girl who was tightly bound with iron chains. At that moment, she was sitting across from Loki in the RV. The reason Loki was left alone to converse with this mysterious girl was precisely because, among the 50 people in the group, he was the only one who could fluently communicate with her in the Chinese language commonly spoken by the Tang people. However, what the bearded Arabs outside the RV didn't know was that Loki had been staring blankly at the girl from the East Continent for over half an hour. Finally, he broke the silence and pulled out a piece of rice paper. "Little sister, do you recognize this character? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 506 Donglu Girl. On the rice paper, a stroke of the pen and a dot of the brush. From the Pre-Qin small seal script to the Tang Dynasty regular script, for nearly 800 years, the Chinese character for person has remained unchanged. For every Han Chinese child who attends school, the first lessons they must learn are about, and, ever since Loki freed the girl, bound in chains, 2 days ago after the Arab cavalry were annihilated and then found in a wooden box on the esplanade, He has been trying to communicate with her. Judging by her appearance, she's between 5 and 8 years old. The owner of the Hengchang ship must have imprisoned her in this box for a long time. By the time she was found, the long-term bondage had caused a degree of muscle atrophy. Even the girl's skin showed dark spots caused by vitamin deficiency. After releasing the girl from the box and removing her chains, she gently rubbed her arms, appearing remarkably docile. But the moment Loki turned his head, the harmless girl instantly regained her aggressiveness. She appeared behind Loki like a ghost. She held out her hands, black mist swirling around them. Only then did Loki realize that the dark patches on the girl's body weren't caused by vitamin deficiency, but rather by psychic energy emanating from her body. Like Sophie in her youth, she possessed a powerful soul that didn't belong in this body. After drinking the divine water, Loki's body became far stronger than that of an ordinary mortal. But the frail girl's black hands easily pierced his skin, piercing deep into his flesh. Unfortunately, the girl's attack was halted there. The next moment, Loki's powerful right arm shot out like a venomous snake, grabbing the girl's limp neck. As his grip tightened, the girl felt an indescribable suffocation. The black aura on her face grew thicker, and even the pupils of her slightly open eyes turned pitch black. She struggled to utter a few unfamiliar words, but no matter how powerful the soul within her, the girl was still immortal. Lack of oxygen caused this human brain to immediately fall into coma. When she ceased struggling, the black mist that enveloped her body finally dissipated. Haha, I didn't expect this little thing to be quite capable. Loki looked at the scratches of varying depths on his arms, smiled wryly, and shook his head. The swordsman aboard the Ever-Sincerity had bound the girl with chains for a reason. 14 years ago, Nefertiti inhabited Sophie's fragile body, capable of less than 10% of her peak abilities. Yet, this didn't prevent her from dispatching the Storm Priest and the Foundation establishment swordsman with ease. The girl before him was clearly also harboring a strange soul, though hers seemed even more sinister and terrifying. After she regained consciousness, Loki began to carefully examine her appearance. The girl, aged between 5 and 8, had yellow skin and black hair, embodying the typical features of the Eastlanders. She showed her arms, and Loki saw ancient characters written on them, resembling pitch-black curse marks. The pattern of the writing bore a striking resemblance to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Strangely, these ancient black characters were covered with another layer of Eastland curse marks, inscribed in dark cinnabar. Those approaching the battle lined up before the battle. 8 powerful large seal characters, interwoven with dark red stripes, converged at the back of the girl's neck, forming a massive seal character. Beneath the cinnabar, a black mist surged. If this mist was the psychic energy wielded by the mysterious spirit within the girl, it was clear that the sealing formation had suppressed a significant portion of it, completely preventing her from unleashing her true divine power. The conclusion now was that, regardless of the origin of the spirit sealed within the girl, it possessed a certain cunning and deceitful nature. Upon her initial release from the wooden box, she behaved remarkably well, no different from a normal girl. But the moment she relaxed, her demonic nature reverted. Fortunately, it was me facing him in the plow cart. Had someone else entered, she would likely have fallen prey to her trap. This raises a new question: why would such a child be with the East Continent Chamber of Commerce, deep in the Sahara Desert? What was the purpose? For safety's sake, Loki evacuated everyone from the building cart. Now alone in the empty carriage, he shackled the unconscious girl's hands with chains. At the same time, he took out some food and water and shoved them into her mouth. Iliad, the boss of the Crescent Moon Merchant Guild, had said they seized the Hengchang's cargo to sell to a woman from the East China Sea in the city named Zhu Fei. All information regarding the Hengchang's whereabouts was also provided to them by this very woman. While clearing the battlefield, Loki noticed that at least 3 of the 6 sword cultivators were forming a stitched formation around a plow cart. Initially, he thought they were protecting the Chamber of Commerce boss. However, upon entering the plow cart, he found nothing inside. After searching for a long time, he found only a young girl chained and beaten to death in a large wooden box. Could it be that Zhu Fei's primary target wasn't these over 100 carts of cargo? She directed the Crescent Moon Merchant Guild to launch the attack, primarily to obtain the East China girl hidden within the plow carts. Regarding the Illuminati, Zhu Fei herself, having lost 13 years of her memories, awakened in the desert and was rescued by the Hashma gang. Loki vaguely sensed that he had once again fallen prey to a vast conspiracy. But for the time being, he is still not sure whether he is just a bystander this time, or he is the ultimate prey in the eyes of these forces. Chapter 507 The Origin of Myths and Legends. Hash's caravan stopped in front of the Shahu Inn. This establishment was particularly popular with caravans entering the Black Desert, thanks to its ample rooms and affordable rates. The inn was a hodgepodge of people, not just merchants crossing the desert, but also many freedmen from the Black Desert. The caravans hoped most of all to encounter familiar temple worshippers from the villages. Upon entering the Black Desert, taking a temple worshipper with them was like adding a free guide, greatly increasing their chances of navigating the desert. Hash, having traversed the Black Desert for years, was a familiar figure at the inn. Arriving at the inn, he smiled and gave the stable doorman a big hug, then deftly pulled out a silver dinar and slipped it into his hand. Hash, you old bastard. Haha, my dear friend, I didn't expect you were still alive. Oh. How could I die? I still have time to mow the grass and plant flowers for you bastards. The lower classes often greeted each other directly. Despite his unremarkable threats, old Hash gave the stable captain a big hug upon meeting him. We've got a big order for this trip. Bulgay, you old bastard, make sure your men take good care of these over 100 fine horses. They're carrying the cargo and research materials of Byzantine scholars. If anything happens to the horses, my men will make it very difficult for you. Word had spread of old Hash's high-profile entry into the city with over 100 wagons. Seeing this usually stingy man so generous, the merchants who had been out watching were even more convinced that he had indeed received a large order from the Royal Academy of Sciences. The door opened, and Loki, swathed in a black robe, emerged from the carriage. The mysterious girl, also dressed in the same attire, was following behind him. Following the crowd, the girl successfully infiltrated the Shahu Inn. Upon entering, a blast of blazing air swept across her face. As night fell, the inn was bustling with activity. Over 30 large, long tables were filled with merchants of all colors. Black, white, brown-skinned Visigoths, burly Turks, and even a few scattered, blonde, dark-eyed Easterners. Seeing this crowd, old Hash immediately understood that his earlier intelligence was true. The inflated prices would inevitably drive large numbers of caravans into this route. The reckless youngsters had already plunged headlong into the Black Desert, while those still lingering at the Sand Lake Inn were seasoned veterans of the route. They were undoubtedly waiting for the first routerney. The Sahara Desert was the domain of Arab merchants. Having long lived across the arid and scorching east-west continental bridge, they possessed a far greater resistance to the desert than any other ethnic group. Of the over 100 merchants dining and drinking in the hall, nearly half were Arabs dressed in loose black robes. The sheer number of merchants brought a linguistic advantage. Even the bard performing on the stage spoke in pure Arabic. As a qualified storyteller, we strive for immersion. Speaking of the scene where King of Paris, Loki, battles the light giant, hey, no one is more expert than Night Kijik Lone. Hearing his name uttered by a storyteller, Loki paused involuntarily. The bard, having stepped onto the stage and realizing he had successfully captured everyone's attention, immediately pulled out an Arabic huqin from behind him and expertly played a melodious melody of war. He then abruptly stood up, facing due north, and unleashed a long, unbroken string of lyrics. That day, the frost giant King Loki turned to his queen mother and whispered, "Laufey, my dear mother. Odin has grown old, and Asgard needs a new master. It's time to restore the might of our giant race. Let me lead the frost giants to conquer your territory, so that my people can find a place to thrive and rest. I've heard that the Duchy of France is rich in dragons. I will conquer this land and offer the head of the Dragon King to celebrate my mother's birthday." Night Kijik Ron was a well-known bard among the nations of the Western continent. In the bustling tavern, his voice, echoing the pure tone of the Urhu, gave him an artistic air. However, Zik never imagined that the person he was singing about was standing less than 10 meters away. Loki was naturally stunned. He knew that the stories woven by bards often differed greatly from the actual history, but he never imagined that in this desert tavern, he would become the son of a god. Wait a minute. God? Son? It seems that's how Norse mythology was later woven into the fabric. Loki became the leader of the frost giants, and the son of the former giant king Laufey. He fathered. The next day, Loki summoned his legions, including his offspring, the giant wolf Fenrir, and Hela, the goddess of death. Today, we will accomplish a feat never before accomplished. We will completely conquer this land and purge the ancient gods hidden within from these ancient veins. From this day forward, the ancient gods under my command, and the Viking warriors who believe in me, We'll stand tall at the summit of the western continent. Ding, 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 ding. The sounds of Huang's harp rang out again, and this multi-talented man even stood up and did an impromptu dance. It was surprising to see this dark-skinned old man also master the triathlon of singing, dancing, and rapping. The bearded Arabs in the room applauded, and many merchants asked their errand boys to offer him drinks and tips. After just the opening verse, a mountain of copper leaves appeared on the copper plate before him. Haha, thank you, gentlemen, the Duchy of France isn't as peaceful as we imagine. We tend to think of it as Edward Longshanks of the House of Plantagenet in control of government. You couldn't be more mistaken. The Duchy of France's true ruler is actually an old one who can transform into a giant of light. As for his palace, it's a ferocious beast the size of a mountain. It has 3 heads, and its body is composed entirely of rock. The bard's vivid description, as if he had actually witnessed a battlefield firsthand, detailed the secrets of the French royal family for the audience, leaving them all in awe. Loki is different from his brother Odin. Odin prefers to transform into human and father demigod children with human women. But Loki descends to Earth with one purpose, to lead the frost giants to crush the Viking enemies. When he leads the frost giants across the North Sea and stands on French soil, what awaits them will be a brutal massacre by dragons and gods alike. Shaking his head slightly, Loki took the East Continent girl beside him and quietly left the hall. If every bard told stories this way, it's no wonder that, millennia later, the myths and legends of every continent would appear in books in exaggerated, incomprehensible forms. Stories of the gods are filled with peacemaking, vendettas, deception, and war. Sons kill fathers, fathers devour sons, explosive plot points, coupled with a myriad of unspeakable secrets. It's like shoddy 21st century online literature. But it's understandable. The bards who roamed taverns and noble mansions also needed an audience, and only stories like this could attract patrons and become after-dinner conversation. After changing hands several times, and undergoing the subjective interpretations and embellishments of one storyteller after another, it's no wonder that, after only 13 years, the story has morphed into what it is today. A mortal war has become a war between the gods. The lively atmosphere of the storytelling session drew the diners to stop and watch. Old Hash nudged Loki's arm, and the group quickly crossed the tavern's lobby and entered the upper-level guest rooms. The rendezvous with the Byzantine scholars was scheduled to take place within this very inn. On the way, Hash's caravan had already been delayed by a sandstorm for nearly 7 days. If nothing unexpected happened, the scholars should have already arrived at the inn by now. Chapter 508 Crisis. Batru, my brother, long time no see. The first thing old Hash did upon entering the inn was walk behind the bar, open his arms to a short, plump man from Donglu, and give him a big hug. The portly owner, with sallow skin and black hair, was of Turkic and Tang descent. His biological mother ran an inn near Hoyan Mountain in Kucha, a crucial route on the Silk Road, with a huge number of travelers passing through daily. Her undisciplined lifestyle left her completely unaware of Nachulu's biological father. It wasn't until he was born and began to possess Donglu characteristics that his mother gave him this name. In Hash's memory, Batru always wore a bright smile. Yet, this time, when he looked at him, he gave him a wry smile. This expression had almost never appeared in old Hash's decades of memory. What's wrong, my brother? I've made a fortune this time. Aren't you happy for me? Bichulu said nothing, but shook his head slightly. He stood up and took old Hash to the backyard of the inn. The spacious backyard was spotlessly cleaned by the servants, and in the far corner there were only 3 or 5 camels kneeling on the ground and taking a leisurely nap. Old Hash squinted his eyes subconsciously when he saw this scene. Something seems not right. With so many merchants gathered in the front hall, the stable in the backyard should be extremely crowded. How could it be empty? Could it be that these merchants did not bring any goods into the desert? They have gone through thousands of hardships. It is not just to enter the inn to listen to the minstrels singing. Old friend, you guess right, Bichulu's voice concealed some vicissitudes of life unique to marginalized people. Under normal circumstances, I would definitely celebrate your gains. But this time, I'm so sorry, you chose to come to Memphis at the wrong time. In previous years, the approaching autumn was the busiest time at the Sand Lake Inn. Large numbers of freedmen from the Black Desert would drive their camels into the city to purchase food, salt, steel, and other daily necessities for the winter. Their arrival was crucial because once winter arrived, the major chambers of commerce would no longer organize caravans. While the Black Desert wasn't a freezing cold place in winter, Prices in Memphis would at least triple. The rapidly expanding trade zone forced the freedmen to adapt to market supply and demand. Meanwhile, the overly empty stables gave old Hash a sliver of worry. How could this happen? He asked gravely. Brother, I'm not entirely sure what's happening deep in the Sahara, Bachulu replied solemnly. But I do know that the number of freedmen who have emerged from the desert this year is quite small. Almost all chambers of commerce have warehouses stockpiled with goods. Silk, glass, and porcelain are fine. But necessities like food, salt, and brown sugar are even cheaper than in Alexandria. It was for this reason that many traveling merchants, eager to pick up bargains, spontaneously entered Memphis. They didn't need to drive a carriage. They could simply purchase goods from the city's chamber of commerce upon seeing a successful return. Hearing this, old Hash subconsciously narrowed his eyes. This isn't right. Knowing that the city's warehouses were overflowing with goods, the managers of the Crescent Chamber of Commerce and the Hangchang were no fools. They couldn't possibly continue delivering goods to the city. This defied common sense. Could it be that all this is really as Loki said, that the real purpose of the eternal sincerity is to transport the girls from East China, and the Crescent Moon Chamber of Commerce is to snatch the girls from East China from their hands? Yes, it must be so, otherwise how could their team carry a guard of 300 cavalrymen? This kind of troops far exceeds the guards of ordinary caravans, and can even start a small war. Damn it, I didn't expect to fall into such a conspiracy. Old Hash's first reaction was to dump the goods in the city and cut a loss on the spot, but Batru continued, Old brother, don't think about getting rid of the goods in the city. The major trading companies have stockpiled a huge amount of goods. In this city, the silk and tea you are carrying will be sold at an absurdly low price. Even if you agree, your men will not agree. Entering the desert is also not a good option now. After secretly exploring the surroundings with his eyes, Batru took old Hash's arm and led him into an empty room. In recent months, 3 or 2 free people have occasionally entered the city. But these people were extremely strict. When questioned about what had happened in the desert, their faces remained solemn, but they refused to answer. After entering the city, their actions were also extremely strange. They didn't sleep with women, and they didn't gamble. Everyone completed their work as quickly as possible, then immediately returned to the depths of the desert. As the saying goes, live by the mountain, eat by the mountain, live by the water, eat by the water. The arid black desert is barren, yet ancient Egypt reigned for over 5,000 years, and for most of that time, this ancient kingdom was the most powerful nation in the world. Pharaohs, nobles, and priests buried immeasurable wealth beneath the sands, and only the freedmen, whose bloodlines inherited the wealth, knew the location of their tombs. Despite their sallow complexion and illiterate nature, these freedmen appeared unrefined, but every one of them was a VIP of the highest caliber. The scarce goods they possessed were already priceless, and if they happened to bring back a few ancient relics from noble tombs, every guild boss would do their utmost to curry their favor. Even if it wasn't the pharaoh's relics, even the burial objects from a noble's tomb, brought back to Constantinople, would be a unique treasure. As for the freedmen, as long as they get a treasure, they can live comfortably in the luxurious suite on the top floor of the hotel for a year. Dressed in brocade and silk, chewing on fresh Mediterranean ingredients, and served by several coolly dressed, fair-skinned women. No one would refuse this kind of life. One more thing, Batru pulled old Hash to a remote stable and pointed at a dozen saddles scattered on the ground. I carefully counted the accounts and found that there were about 28 caravans that entered the Black Desert in the past 2 months. Boss Hash, you also know that many small caravans choose to exchange horses for camels in my hotel to prevent them from getting lost in the desert. However, when I thoroughly checked the accounts, I discovered that less than 10 of these caravans made it back safely. The vast majority of these 10 were trapped by the surging Quicksand River, forcing them to return empty-handed. Every caravan merchant who crossed the Quicksand River, every last one, has vanished. Old Hash, his face solemn, produced 2 cigarettes and handed them to the serious-looking Batru beside him. He placed a cigarette between his teeth, leaned his head toward the torch on the wall, and gently lit it. Rolling tobacco with a piece of wood pulp paper, a fusion of Eastern and Western technologies, was one of the first inventions to be popularized by the Byzantine Royal Academy. After decades of refinement, Visigothic tobacco merchants began adding calming herbs and a small amount of alchemical powder with a mild sedative effect. A few puffs can quickly calm an anxious person. Beyond Memphis, there are no more official roads. Instead, There's endless yellow sand. Many caravans with smaller cargo loads would choose to unload their horses and use camels instead. The stable where travelers stored their horses was a semi-underground stone chamber. Nearly 100 saddles of various shapes were densely packed at the far end, covered in a thick layer of dust. The inn had no obligation to permanently store the horses of the merchants. The high mortality rate in the Black Desert prevented many travelers from returning. After 2 months, the inn would sell their horses and place silver into the saddles, waiting for their relatives to claim them. This large number of saddles exceeded the number had seen in any given year. The inexplicable loss of hundreds of lives stirred a wave of worry in him. The two men stared silently at the flickering flames on the wall. For a long moment, no one uttered another word. Chapter 509, Scholars' Appeals, 1. After fighting side by side, Hash and Loki were no longer enemies. Before entering the city, Hash had revealed that his mission to escort the Byzantine scholars into the Black Desert was entirely due to the support of the Waldorf family. 15 years later, Emma Waldorf, who had entered the Leviathan's bowels with Loki, had become the undisputed chief explorer of the Royal Academy of Sciences through her research into the New World. Thanks to the new shipping routes pioneered by the Waldorf family, countless merchant ships ply the route day and night, bringing back chocolate, coffee, rubber, rare flora and fauna, and even living sacrifices invaluable to the chosen ones. Merchants no longer fear death at the hands of Amazon warriors, as the new king of the New World, Yam the Pure, was a close friend of the Waldorf family. Leveraging the civil unrest in the Tang dynasty and this route, the Byzantine Empire significantly narrowed its trade deficit with Eastern nations, even catching up. Since 138 BC, when Han envoy Zhang Jin opened the Silk Road to the western regions, a steady stream of gold and silver flowed to the mysterious east. The western continent was in great demand for Eastern silk, porcelain, and tea. Unwilling to discard the tea leaves that had rotted and fermented due to moisture and rain along the way, they shipped them to the western continent, dried them, and drank the beverage they called black tea with disdain. Eventually, even the nobility became accustomed to black tea, which had a longer shelf life and a richer flavor. Meanwhile, the western continent's abundant commodities, such as cheese, flax, olive oil, and wine, were not widely available in the eastern continent. These goods were so slow to sell that many eastern continent merchants would rather return with empty carts than load them with such useless goods. Reversing the trade surplus was a feat their ancestor, Rome, had never accomplished. Building the Byzantine Empire into another golden empire, recreating the all roads lead to Rome of 800 years ago, had been the long-cherished wish of the Byzantine rulers since their founding. With the influx of gold, the once modest Royal Academy expanded rapidly. No longer a single building, it now encompassed 7 streets and 542 houses within Constantinople. A new district, the Academic District, was established within the capital. Abundant funding, coupled with support from the Byzantine Imperial Court and the Byzantine Chamber of Commerce, provided the previously meager academicians with ample funds to support their research. The years of war in the Eastern Tang dynasty also prompted many scholars from the eastern continent to leave their war-torn homelands and travel thousands of miles to the western continent in search of a more stable research environment. This further fueled the rapid growth of the Royal Academy. Within just 10 years, the knowledge held by scholars from the eastern and western continents was rapidly merging. They achieved breakthroughs in medical technology, metallurgy, shipbuilding, blacksmithing, and numerous other disciplines. Roman citizens were astonished to discover that, in addition to the illustrious bishops, the scholars of the Cathedral degli Accademia had also transformed every aspect of their lives. Technological innovations provided them with more convenient tools, stronger livestock, and more efficient trade and farming methods. Citizens viewed the scholars with increasing respect, often even referring to them as mentors. Last year, the Senate, by a vote of 102 to 73, approved a motion by Byzantine Emperor Michael II to add 20 seats to the 175-seat Senate for the Cathedral degli Accademia. Not only did the scholars gain a foothold in Constantinople, they even began to gain a voice in politics. Never before in its history had the word science enjoyed such a glorious status. After Emma became a senator, more members of the Waldorf family began to abandon business and join the Royal Academy. Leading the expedition this time was Emma's younger sister, 22-year-old Margwin Waldorf. 15 years prior, they had entered Night City and successfully escaped from the Leviathan's bowels. Loki had seized the Imperial Seal and the Zuinun sword, while Old Gore had taken the Scorpion bracelet, the Mask of Horus, which imprisoned Nefertiti's soul, and the Scepter of Anubis. Emma Waldorf had also taken spoils of war. When the Cyclops stormed the Obsidian Pyramid, she was still documenting the obsidian columns left behind by Sumerian civilization. Knowing the enemy was approaching and time was running out, she seized 2 massive leather scrolls from a mountain of ancient Babylonian stone columns. As she ran, she grabbed several ancient books and stuffed them into her backpack. In her panic, Emma had no time to carefully select, so she simply grabbed the essential ancient books. Upon her successful return to the Royal Academy, she was astonished to discover that these books were maps drawn in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. She was no linguist, and ancient Egypt had long since vanished. The remaining temple priests dwelt in the Black Desert, rarely seen in civilized society. This meant that few in Constantinople could decipher the volumes. Though young at the time, Emma had clearly seen the vast murals carved into the walls of the Obsidian Pyramid. She knew that these mysterious ancient books from the Leviathan's bowels could not be revealed easily, lest they attract the Illuminati's attention and bring about her own death. Since returning to the Royal Academy, the books had long sat unnoticed in her laboratory, hidden among ordinary files. After her return, Emma was busy researching the ancient sites and gods of the New World, spending very little time in the Citadel during the year. She had almost forgotten that she still possessed several mysterious ancient books from the Obsidian Pyramid. 10 years had passed before these dusty volumes were once again opened by a pair of young hands. While wandering through her sister's laboratory, 16-year-old paleographer Mergwin Waldorf stumbled upon several ancient scrolls and was astonished by the exquisite artwork within. However, after only a few pages, she immediately discovered hidden flaws within these ancient books. 10 years prior, after Emma had narrowly escaped death in the Leviathan's bowels and returned to Constantinople, the Royal Academy was still in a relatively primitive state. There wasn't even a single scholar in the entire academy who could read ancient Egyptian, let alone decipher the books. However, 10 years later, when Mergwin rediscovered the dusty ancient books, the academy had become a vastly improved institution. Not only had a large number of linguists and philologists emerged within the Citadel, but ample research funding had even enabled them to refine their disciplines, giving rise to numerous subcategories such as semioticians, dragon-tonguers, and even divine-tonguers. 16-year-old Mergwin Waldorf happened to be a paleophilologist apprentice. She entered the Citadel at the age of 12, studying and living there daily, now possessing 4 years of research experience. Several intricately carved hieroglyphs on a dusty leather binding caught her eye first. She removed the book and brushed off the thick layer of dust. The inner pages were made entirely of papyrus, a flexible grass. Unlike the pulp paper made from crushed wood by the people of the East Continent, this paper felt more like plant leaves than paper. By this time, the Citadel was no stranger to these papyrus-bound books. The Citadel's largest building, the Byzantine Library, was illuminated throughout the night. It housed numerous books of the dead brought back from the Black Desert by traveling caravan merchants. These books were created by Styx priests during the death rites of ancient Egyptian temple priests and nobles. The Book of the Dead recorded the deceased's achievements. Upon the death of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, noble, or temple priest, their souls carried the Book of the Dead across the underworld to the realm of the dead. Along the way, their souls must retrieve all memories lost after death from the Book of the Dead. When confronted by Osiris, the god of the underworld, their messenger, Anubis, will open the Book of the Dead and carefully examine their deeds in life to determine their eligibility for reincarnation. The next step is the mysterious weighing of the heart ritual. Before Osiris, a pair of scales is placed. Anubis will scoop out the deceased's heart from one side and place a feather, symbolizing the soul, on the other. If the heart is lighter than the feather, it means the deceased did not commit excessive slaughter in the mortal world and did not send too many souls into the underworld, burdening the gods. The deceased will be able to pass through Hades and face the next god's judgment. If the heart is heavier than the feather, it signifies a killer who has sent countless souls into the underworld, disrupting the balance between the yin and yang realms. Osiris will then toss the heart to a nearby monster to devour. The deceased will be forever imprisoned in Hades, unable to rise again. The meisters of the Citadel never believed the records in the Book of the Dead could be true. They all associated these practices with the Eastlanders' practice of burning paper money and wearing paper flowers, believing them to be mere illusions of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead held little value for them, merely an ancient text for entertainment. The ancient Egyptian kingdom had been fallen for nearly 800 years. After 800 years, most of the ancient kingdom lay buried beneath the sands, and none of its paper remained. The only way to decipher the ancient Egyptian script, short of venturing into the vast Sahara Desert, was to rely on the Book of the Dead, sealed in stone coffins along with the bodies. The Meisters relied on these scrolls sold by traveling caravan merchants to translate the ancient text. For decades, hundreds of caravans had crossed the desert, yet none had brought back a single book that wasn't from the Book of the Dead. But the volumes in Mergwin's hands were not. On a beautiful afternoon, the 16-year-old Meister extended his slender fingers, gently tracing every word on the ancient tome. Having only been in the citadel for 4 years, and having been half disciplined by play and half study, the noblewoman was still unable to decipher every word in the ancient text. But she could vaguely sense that what she held in her hand seemed to be a map. A map containing mysterious sealed artifacts. Leotinus I, Biki, and Attila, these were the names of the 3 sealed artifacts. Emma would, of course, keep the findings from the obsidian pyramid a secret from others, but remember, just a few months after returning to the citadel, she found herself joined by Galmarish. This Viking blacksmith was a real talker, especially after a few glasses of ale. He would pat his chest and leap onto the table, vividly recounting to the younger generations of the Waldorf family how he heroically stabbed a Medusa to death and entered the bowels of Leviathan, and how he subsequently escaped with the guidance of the wise and mighty patriarch Loki. Mergwin had heard these stories many times in her childhood, and she naturally understood that all the items from the obsidian pyramid were of great value. These 3 ancient books, placed at the center of the pyramid, must also be extremely valuable. She then began to investigate the origins of these 3 mysterious individuals. However, this investigation only brought up more questions. Chapter 510, Scholars' Appeals, 3. Obtaining information in the Middle Ages was not easy. During this era, the history of a kingdom was often considered a secret, kept within the palace. By 810 AD, even though the scholars had begun to gather their forces and recruit scholars from various countries to enter the citadel, it still took Mergwin nearly 2 months to investigate the identities of the 3 ancient individuals. The most famous of the 3 was Leotinus I. Mergwin had heard countless legends about this Spartan king from bards since childhood, without even having to consult ancient scrolls. In 480 BC, the Persian army, led by King Darius, invaded Greece. This event, known to scholars as the Persian War, gave rise to a world-renowned hero. At the pass known as Thermopylae, King Leotinus I of Sparta, with his 300 guards and a small coalition of Greek city-states, successfully held off King Darius's advance. No one can say for sure how many enemies the 300 warriors slew in this narrow pass, less than 30 meters wide. Songs passed down through generations even claim that they slew many of the gods who served under King Darius. They stubbornly held out for 3 days, but ultimately, betrayed by a traitor, the 300 warriors were attacked from both sides and slain. 800 years later, the former city-state of Sparta had long since vanished, but Leotinus I, through word of mouth among the people of the western continent, had become akin to a god of war. The sealed figure in the second book is named Biki, a name distinctly Eastern Continental. While the Academy had begun to take shape compared to its predecessor, it had only been around for a dozen years. The library held few records of the ancient peoples of the Eastern Continent. Ultimately, Mergwin, relying on his family's influence, invited 2 hermits from the Mahas school to the west, and finally discovered the identity of this Biki. This was a general who served under King Yingzhang of Qin 1,000 years ago. He was incredibly ruthless. Though he was undefeated in battle, he treated life with disregard. After every victory, he would bury the surrendered soldiers. During the Battle of Changping, he buried 400,000 surrendered soldiers in a single battle. An elderly Eastern land cultivator further stated that, in his youth, he had heard rumors among fellow cultivators that General Biki was a demon-possessed individual who practiced heretical and unorthodox methods. He required the cultivation of vast numbers of deceased souls to enhance his abilities. Therefore, after every battle, even if the king of Qin tried to stop him, he would resort to any means of massacre. Whether these rumors were true or not is unknown. However, it is a fact that this man was responsible for more than a dozen horrific massacres. This is a fact that is undeniable. The final figure is the most bizarre. The Spartan king Leotinus I and the Eastern land god of killing, Biki, were both ancient beings who lived thousands of years ago. However, the Hun Emperor Attila, known as the Scourge of God, lived only a little over 400 years ago. 800 years earlier, the famous Western Han general Chen Tang's declaration, "Those who openly offend the mighty Han will be punished, even at a distance," launched the Han dynasty's century-long campaign to expel the Huns. For centuries, Chinese monks had driven these nomadic peoples on horseback from the eastern continent all the way to the east-west continental bridge. Eventually, they sought only a glimmer of hope on the frigid Siberian plateau. However, wars between civilizations often inadvertently temper both sides in blood and fire. Even a centipede dies, but its strength remains. After nearly a century of respite, the Hun knights were shocked to discover that the cross-bearing soldiers of the western continent were as fragile as chickens compared to the eastern continent monks. With their respite restored, the Huns began invading the nations of the western continent like wildfire. They chanted the name of Mengge the celestial god, brandished their sabers, and bravely fought bravely. They only stopped when they reached the walls of the Eastern and Western Roman empires. By then, the Attila Empire, founded entirely by the Huns, was already no smaller in territory than either of them. Devout Christians from various nations dubbed this powerful cavalry the Scourge of God, believing it to be divine punishment from the Holy Lord for their comfortable lives. However, nomads, moving swiftly and like bandits, were ultimately unfit rulers. Within a few decades, the Attila Empire collapsed amidst power struggles among the nobles. The powerful army, known as the Scourge of God, vanished like a bubble exposed to the scorching sun. Attila, the founder of the Attila Empire, quickly faded from the memories of the people of the Western continent. In the eyes of the Holy Church, this was a deeply humiliating historical event, and thus it was often concealed. Through extensive research and visits in countries where the Church's membership exceeded 90%, Mergwin finally fully understood the identity of the Huns mentioned in the ancient scrolls. However, after fully understanding the identities of these three individuals, Mergwin was left with even greater doubts. King Leodatus I of Sparta was born in 432 BC and died in 480 BC. While the songs of the bards might be unreliable, the Iliads, compiled by the ancient Greek writer Homer, are always trustworthy. This work can confirm his true lifespan. While the records of the ancient people of the eastern continent within the citadel are incomplete, the unification of Qin Shi Huang is recorded in the records of the Grand Historian. Based on this work, Mergwin could roughly infer the existence of Baiki, the god of death. These two individuals lived before the fall of ancient Egypt. While the kingdom was no longer the dominant force in human civilization, its size remained. If the Styx priests of that era used some unknown method to imprison the souls of these two individuals and then hid them somewhere, this seems straightforward. However, Attila, the Scourge of God, mentioned in the third book, was a Hun born around 400 AD. By this time, the Ptolemaic Empire had fallen over 300 years ago. In that era, only tens of thousands of old God believers remained in the Black Desert, and they were powerless to resist the Roman police's pursuit. Crossing the desert to capture anyone was even more difficult, especially capturing the founder of an empire, a barbarian warrior who had massacred millions of Christians, an almost impossible task. However, the ancient tome in his hand clearly recorded the location of Attila's seal, which made Mergwin begin to speculate. If everything his sister and old Gower had said about the obsidian pyramid was true, then the scrolls these three books had retrieved from it must not have been random. And if the three sealed humans described in these books were indeed the work of the Illuminati, then could the so-called underworld not be a fabrication of the temple priests? If the underworld is real, and so is the Book of the Dead. Like Asgard in Norse mythology, the underworld is a real plane of existence. Upon death, all mortals must obey certain mysterious rules, allowing their disembodied souls to transmigrate to the underworld. In 804 AD, scholars had been studying the Book of the Dead for some time. This tome, paired with Egyptian nobles and priests, primarily records the experiences of mortals who enter the underworld after death. However, it seems to only mention one type of person, mortals. What if it were a transcendental being? 13 years earlier, Loki led an army of frost giants to slay Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea, who had transformed into a god, in Paris. Witnessed by hundreds of thousands of English mobs and over 1 million French citizens, the event was a foregone conclusion. For over a decade, this great victory for humanity not only fully exposed the hidden Illuminati but also implicitly crowned the mortal Loki with the title Godslayer. This made Mergwin, a Meester, ponder. A powerless mortal noble stood before Osiris, the lord of the underworld, scrutinized by this supreme deity. The deity could abuse them like maggots. They ripped out their hearts and, if dissatisfied, tossed them to spirit beasts, completely unconcerned with the mortals' opinion. This was because the deities held absolute power over mortals. But what if they faced a powerful being like Loki Starg, possessing the power to kill gods? Would they dare rip out a mortal's heart in the face of a powerful spirit ready to slaughter them at any moment? It seemed no maester in the Citadel had ever conducted research on this question. The souls of these three mortals were now sealed in the underworld. And what I held in my hands was the map to their soul's location. Thank you to these 10 friends who followed my reading. While I don't know why I am persevering, you've given me so much motivation. Thank you. Chapter 511, Scholar's Appeals, 4. Although Mergwyn had spent nearly her entire life studying and researching, having grown up in an aristocratic family, she knew the true nature of the world. Just because something was a fact didn't guarantee its public recognition. The existence of the underworld was blatant blasphemy to the now all-powerful Holy Bishop's Church. The Holy Bishop's crucial means of recruiting followers were the words heaven and hell. Believers who converted to the Holy Bishop and devoted their lives to good deeds and preaching would ascend to heaven. Those who committed evil and murderous acts would be condemned to hell after death. This was the foundation of all believers' faith. Replacing the priest's illusory concepts of heaven and hell with a real underworld would be a devastating blow to the Holy Bishop's Church. All the stories told in the Bible and the Gospels would lose their foundation, becoming groundless hypotheses. The Holy Bishop would never tolerate such heresy. Mergwyn, born into aristocratic family, also received her basic education in the parochial schools established by the Holy Church, so she understood this principle deeply. After discovering a few texts, she had limited interactions with family members and never gave a speech in a formal setting. It wasn't until last year, as her research deepened, that she first discussed her hypothesis with Hoffmann Heinzeli, the Citadel's chief scholar of ancient civilizations. Hoffmann's eyes lit up like comets. Scientific research requires the participation of young people. Despite devoting his days to studying the relics of his ancestors, Hoffmann Heinzeli was not stubborn. While the elderly scholars possessed a wealth of knowledge and experience, they could not match the creative thinking of the rising sun. At that time, parochial schools monopolized the basic education of all citizens within the Byzantine Empire. From the moment they learned to read, children held the Bible in their hands, studying the influence of the 12 apostles on the world. Few dared to question the existence of heaven, much less imagine the reality of the underworld humans went to after death. This was certainly due to lack of evidence. But now, 3 heavy books lay before him. Shepherd's Plains, Sea of Exile, and Temple of the Afterlife. The maps within these 3 books use names that didn't belong to any of the Kyushu continent's plates. But a closer look revealed a striking resemblance between the landmasses and the planet they inhabited. The 3 illustrated books devoted extensive space to describing the locations of various bizarre soul beasts along the path to the secret prison. If this were merely subjective conjecture, the maps were excessively detailed. Hoffmann attached unprecedented importance to Mergwyn's proposal for 2 main reasons. First, the existence of the underworld could explain many of his questions. For years, he had been fascinated by the endless yellow sands of the northern continent. What had always struck him most was the massive pyramids that still stood silently in their original locations after thousands of years. The pyramid's craftsmanship was so exquisite that it filled him with awe. Even 3,300 years after its completion, it remains the tallest structure in the land of Kyushu. Its spire reaches nearly 150 meters. At the time, the main structure of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople stood only 54 meters. Standing beneath the Pyramid of Khufu, the church resembles a newborn baby standing beneath an adult's feet. Furthermore, the pyramid was constructed with exceptional precision. No plastic materials were used in the entire structure, constructed entirely from granite weighing tens or even hundreds of tons. The joints between the rocks are impenetrable to even the sharpest of knives, and the polishing technique required is beyond the comprehension of any architect. Even a Maha's disciple from the Tang dynasty in the east could not create a perfectly smooth, mirror-like finish from tens of tons of stone. Even more astonishing are the hidden details within the pyramid's foundation. The base, approximately 150 meters long, has a horizontal deviation of just 2 centimeters between its left and right extremes. Even this minute deviation is likely the result of slow erosion by wind and sand over the 3,000 years since the building was constructed. It's conceivable that at the time of its construction, the horizontal error of the Pyramid of Khufu was most likely 0. Hoffmann was certain that the pharaohs must have relied on the power of the outer gods to build this complex structure, a testament to its exceptional craftsmanship. However, from the fragmentary murals, it's still clear that the primary construction workers were still the slaves who served the temple priests. This is easy to understand. The outer gods traveled thousands of miles across the void to descend upon this planet, but they weren't there to serve as construction workers. The hundreds of thousands of slaves who toiled daily around the pyramids were the primary contractors. Producing hundreds of thousands of slaves capable of tilling the land wasn't a difficult feat, but training hundreds of thousands of construction workers capable of completing such a complex design was the real challenge. In recent decades, with the help of the Holy Church, children across the Western continent have begun receiving unified education from a young age, at least partially learning to read. This fosters the ability to read and learn independently. However, in ancient Egyptian civilization 4,000 years ago, literacy was a privilege reserved for high-ranking clergy. Most mortals could not read, and the kingdom lacked any basic education system. How did the pharaohs manage to continuously acquire such a large number of skilled craftsmen during the decades-long construction period? Hoffman devoted himself to this question, knowing that once he found the answer, the great Byzantine Empire would take another major step forward. However, decades of research yielded little. Mergwin's hypothesis gave him a fresh perspective. What if the underworld truly existed? If the depiction of mortals passing through the underworld upon death, as depicted in the Book of the Dead, were true, then this seemed easy to achieve. Before death, the most talented individuals within the ancient Egyptian kingdom had their bodies preserved by Styx priests. Their souls would carry the Book of the Dead through the yin and yang, then enter the underworld and return again through some unknown and secret means. This indirectly enabled the individual spirit to achieve immortality. Imagine hundreds of thousands of skilled workers who had survived for more than 10, or even hundreds, of lifetimes. The creations they could create would be astonishing. Perhaps only they could create the great pyramids that stand tall in the yellow sand for thousands of years. Chapter 512, Scholars' Appeals, 5. Hoffman's concern lay with the academic questions surrounding the study of ancient civilizations. But by then, the citadel had already grown from a mere seedling into a towering tree. When scholars began to earn seats in parliament, politicians inevitably flocked to the scene. The current president of the Royal Academy, Ivo, was a professional politician. Just as most great achievements in the world arise from accidental success, so too did the Byzantine Royal Academy. 52 years ago, Mikhail II's younger brother, Prince Scipio Mikhail of Byzantium, was considered a family outcast. Uneducated and unskilled, his lifelong interest lay solely in the strange and exquisite artifacts of antiquity. He passionately collected artifacts from various civilizations throughout history, deeply curious about their origins, uses, and the stories behind them. Scipio's interests extended beyond the dazzling array of gold and silver. Rusted farm tools, ancient clothing, even the tattered remains of a dictionary would captivate him, allowing him to gaze at them for days on end. He would gather his attendants in a magnificent hall to discuss the artifact's origins, analyzing its minute details and its ancient uses. Although he didn't sit on the throne as the kingdom's ruler, Scipio Mikhail nonetheless bore the illustrious title of a family. He possessed an inexhaustible supply of royal resources. Over time, more and more scholars joined his ranks, and they, in turn, brought ancient artifacts recovered from ancient ruins across the globe to the Mikhail family palace. Regular gatherings, coupled with deliberate publicity, attracted a growing number of Constantinople nobles to join these curious expeditions. Within just 10 years, the scholar's research had evolved from a private hobby for the nobility into a true career. Seeing the time was ripe, Scipio decided to emulate his ancient Greek predecessors and establish a dedicated research institute to provide a better environment for their research and exchange. Thus, the Byzantine Royal Academy of Sciences was born. At the time, the newly established Royal Academy still struggled to shake off its reputation as the private plaything of the nobility. However, no one could have imagined that, after just over 50 years, its membership would expand from its initial 32 members to nearly 6,000. It was during this period that Principal Ivo joined the academy as an administrator. Scholars hailed from all corners of Kyushu. Especially in recent years, thanks to the intertwining of Eastern and Western civilizations, the academy has been producing research findings monthly, improving existing technologies or creating new value. When the scholars began receiving seats on the council, Ivo, now serving as the principal, had a clear understanding. Whether they accepted or not, these 20 seats would be like a whirlpool in the ocean, dragging them towards the center of power under the Roman rulers. A massive shadow loomed over the academy, the Holy Episcopal Church, now wielding immense power in the Western continent. Having spent most of his life as a professional politician, Ivo's assessment of danger surpassed many of his colleagues. He knew that a war between the academy and the Holy Episcopal Church was inevitable in the near future. The differences between the two stemmed from fundamental ideological differences. After communicating with Scipio Mikhail, the Citadel's biggest backer, the prince's implicit support further solidified his conviction. Scipio's standing within Byzantium had also risen significantly in recent years. Carried with a reputation of a loser for most of his life, the Royal Academy of Sciences he had inadvertently founded had now grown from a mere seedling into a towering tree. Scipio began to harbor even greater ambitions. He hoped to leverage his vast capital to reclaim basic education, a sector monopolized by the Holy Church, from the monks. From then on, the children of the Byzantine Empire would be freed from the brainwashing of the holy bishops and attend schools run by scholars. They would no longer need to pore over Bibles and learn about the history of the saints' conquests of heaven and earth. Instead, they would systematically study grammar, mathematics, astronomy, and history, ultimately becoming skilled workers or independent thinkers. Only then could the people of the Western continent truly escape ignorance and become a golden nation as great as the Tang dynasty in the East. However, the path to science was never an easy one for the continent. Since its inception, the Holy Church has persecuted its scholars in secret. In 752 AD, the paleontologist Pallasson held up a fossil in the middle of a marketplace, explaining to the people around him that it was animal remains, not the creator's play. He was subsequently detained by the tortured acolytes of the Inquisition and died in prison, artificially forgotten. In 758 AD, the medical scholar Servetus, over his theory that blood flows from the heart and then circulates back to it, arguing with an archbishop of the Path of Holy Light. The archbishop firmly believed that blood was an impure substance produced by pure spiritual energy coming into contact with a corrupted body, and was not a part of the human body. The fanatical believers burned Servetus to death at the stake, torturing him for 3 days and 3 nights. The church controlled nearly 80% of the Western continent's armed forces. The scholars, generally blind believers, were powerless and completely unable to resist the church. Such cases represent only the tip of the iceberg in the vast sea of bloodshed. Over the decades, over 1,000 scholars have been publicly executed. Countless more have been secretly killed while on expeditions. War and blood will inevitably crisscross the Citadel's path to success. Since this is unavoidable, we must gather clues as soon as possible to prepare for the next stage of battle. Before setting out, Mergwin was summoned by the headmaster to the summit of the Spire of Contemplation, the Citadel's highest point. 12 leading scholars from various disciplines gathered around a round table, listening to the instructions of the headmaster and the prince. 52 years later, the then 18-year-old prince had transformed into a mature and experienced politician. Though Mergwin was born into the Waldorf family, this was her first encounter with a member of the Byzantine royal family in her 21 years of living there. Our empire may appear prosperous, but its economy, culture, military might, and even its territory have remained largely unchanged for nearly 100 years. To maintain Rome's glory, we must make changes, and the first change is to weaken Gregory's authority. The Gregory Scipio was referring to as the current Holy Pope, Gregory III. Constantinople's landmark, Hagia Sophia, stood in the city center, not far from the academic district. This majestic structure eclipsed even the imperial palace by comparison. I support your expedition. If we can find evidence of the real existence of the underworld, the Holy Church's bullshit theory of only by doing good can you ascend to heaven will immediately become a trick of quacks, and I will once again introduce a bill in the Senate to take back the right to spread basic education from the hands of the Church. Just imagine, in the future, schools with scholars as instructors will be built all over the kingdom, and the glory of science will take root in the hearts of all citizens from childhood, a prosperous era where everyone understands literature, everyone understands mathematics, and everyone is familiar with history. We will build a more prosperous Rome that will be remembered forever by the world. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 513, Scholars' Appeals, 6. Sand Lake Inn, 2 hours later. So, are you all clear on our purpose? As night fell, the spacious suite was brightly lit. Mergwin stood in the center, surrounded by over 20 figures standing and sitting, forming a vast semicircle. Everyone stared at the ruler in the young woman's hands and a map on the wall. It was also a topographical map of the northern continent, but this one, drawn by Byzantine scholars, was far more detailed and larger than the one in Old Hash's hands. A brief silence fell in the suite's living room. Faced with the situation before her, a flash of panic flashed across the eyes of the 22-year-old Meester, Mergwin Waldorf. The scene of Prince Scipio meeting with the chief Meesters 3 months ago was still vivid in her mind. In the meeting room atop the contemplative spire, Mergwin sat in the shadows of the far corner. Throughout the meeting, she listened to the dignitaries present discussing the prospect of a direct war with the Holy Church, feeling a surge of unease. The meeting lasted all night, and Mergwin spent the night in a state of half-sleep. It wasn't until the rising sun poured its rays into the spire of contemplation that Prince Scipio entrusted her with the task of leading the team into the Black Desert. She took on the mission, still dazed. Why had the chief Meesters chosen her? Mergwin had no idea. But she knew that many of the Meesters in the Citadel had put in a tremendous amount of effort for this operation. Several chief Meesters had stayed out of the expedition to maintain a low profile, and those accompanying her into the Black Desert were the top talents from the various academies. The chief Meesters also fully utilized their connections, selecting the most suitable candidate from among the 72 caravans of merchants. First, this candidate couldn't be a believer in the Holy Lord. Even though Gregory II didn't publicly condemn the Meesters for heresy after they received seats in the Senate, Byzantine citizens could still sense the tension between the monks and Meesters. Nearly 90% of the kingdom's citizens were followers of the Holy Lord. This single factor eliminated all major merchant guilds. Independent caravan traders became the Meesters' only option. They sought caravan owners who were not only familiar with the desert terrain, but also possessed basic professional skills. The boundless Black Desert, vast enough to bury the entire Mediterranean Sea, meant that any journey through this desolate sea of sand could lead to disaster. The caravan traders acting as guides had to at least ensure they wouldn't abandon the Meesters to escape alone when danger struck. This eliminated a significant number of candidates. Mergwin only knew the caravan owner Scipio had found for her was named Memdhash. After such lengthy preparations, when they finally appeared before her, she felt a moment of daze. Across the room, Memdhash had also been surprised to find that the Citadel's leader for this trip was a young woman. It took him a long time to finally grasp the situation as he led the caravan's core members into the room, watching Mergwin survey the map for a long time before finally comprehending the situation. He couldn't be blamed. Every Meester standing behind the 22-year-old seemed far more capable than she. This was evident from the bachelor's insignia they wore on their chests. Many wore 3, or even 4, gold and silver insignias, signifying the completion of bachelor's degrees in 3 or 4 disciplines. Mergwin, on the other hand, still wore only the owl insignia of scholar of ancient civilizations, making him the most inconspicuous of all the bachelors. To ease the awkward atmosphere, Old Hash adjusted his head and rose from the soft sofa. Miss Mergwin, I am old, and perhaps I don't fully grasp your meaning. Are you suggesting that we find a way to lead you to the Styx priests and, through them, to the city of the dead? Mergwin glanced at the bachelors behind her, and they all nodded. Well, that's right. Old Hash stroked his beard, a wry smile on his face. I've been able to walk through the sand crossing unscathed at this age, not because of some illusory luck, but because I follow the same route every year. There are 5 tribes of temple worshippers in the Black Desert, and my caravan follows the same route every year. I've traveled this route so many times, not to mention the bandits along the way. Even the most inanimate creatures along the way recognize my caravan. Only by following this route can I ensure I don't lose my way. I also offer appropriate tribute to the bandits and monsters on the hills along the way, ensuring safe passage. The Mbia Oasis, home to the Temple of Anubis, is indeed a crucial stop on the journey. I can lead the scholars into their town. But, with all due respect, I visit their village every year, but I almost never see any Styx rites. Even if we were lucky enough to gain an introduction, I have no confidence in the existence of the mysterious city of the dead. But Mergwin stopped mid-sentence. As clever as she was, she immediately understood the question. This old man didn't speak like that in Constantinople. In his shop, he would brew milk tea while pulling out the various items he'd collected in the Black Desert, vividly recounting his adventures to the assembled nobles. A common potion priced at 2 gold coins could instantly triple in price with a tale of the Hashma caravan invading the city of the dead and battling ancient monsters, and if he added a story about his encounter with an exotic freeman girl, word would spread, and sales could potentially multiply several times over. Now that he thought about it, this behavior was not uncommon among merchants. In the Waldorf family's own shops, every store manager sold their wares this way every day. The servants and gentlemen who frequently went to the market knew that the merchants' tales are half as fabulous as half true, but the meisters, toiling away at their desks within the citadel, didn't understand this truth. At the age of 42, the leading scholar of ancient civilizations, Hoffmann Heinzli, was without a wife or children, and still lived with his elderly mother. His food, clothing, and everything else were purchased by his mother. He could easily decipher most of the text in an ancient book. Yet, such a man, upon entering the market, had no idea how much a bottle of wine cost. The honest scholar was easily deceived by these cunning merchants, unable to discern truth from his extravagant tales. This created a dilemma for Mergwin. Seeing the atmosphere of their first meeting quickly shift from relaxed to solemn, Old Hash hurriedly waved his hand. Though these people are mysterious, there are still at least 20,000 to 30,000 people living in the Mia Oasis. If all else fails, we can stay a while longer and ask the natives to help us find something, although I'm not particularly familiar with the scholars of the Royal Academy, my lady. The Waldorf family and I behind you are old friends. I will do my best to help you with your needs. Old Hash managed to say this with great difficulty. The pile of saddles that the innkeeper Batru had shown him yesterday afternoon still flashed back to him. Batru was right. The scarcity of free people entering the city has left all the merchant guilds with a large inventory of goods. The prices offered by the guilds are unimaginably low. Even if he could agree, his men certainly wouldn't. Whether to appease these scholars or to dispose of the over 100 carts of goods, Old Hash had no choice but to forge ahead into the Black Desert. Inside the spacious inn room, the two sides continued their conversation. At that moment, in the room next door, a tall young man pushed past the enthusiastic waitress and swayed as he closed the door. Entering the room, his dazed expression quickly shifted to focus. He discarded the bottle and pulled a wine glass from his bosom. With his sharp fingertips, he scraped away the base of the ceramic cup, forming a round barrel. Heath pressed the glass against the wall, listening intently to the conversation between Old Hash and Mergwin in the adjacent room. Haha, what meester? The oldest ways are the safest. This man was truly Heath Blancher under concubine Zoo. Upon discovering that the Crescent Merchant Guild hadn't entered Thebes as planned, the disciples of the Fa school immediately changed their formation and sent him to the inn where Hash's caravan was staying. Eavesdropping and taking notes, he pulled out his quill and quickly scrawled the words Styx Sacrifice and City of the Dead on the wall. Chapter 514 Heath's Visit. The holy fire burns my soul, my lord, forgive my sins. I am destined to surrender my body to the holy fire, and my soul to be joined in the eternal flame. The next morning, before dawn, Old Hash had already spread a blanket on the ground, lit the holy fire, and recited the flame Bible. This was a daily ritual for the devout members of the Firebearers. His parents had done this daily since he was a child, and it had instilled in him the habit of morning prayer. Honestly, Old Hash didn't understand why the meisters of the Citadel would choose him, despite his modest capital, among the countless other caravans. However, he was a seasoned businessman who had spent most of his life in the business world. The Citadel had seen a surge in recent years, and access to it presented a golden opportunity for any merchant to soar to the top. He simply wouldn't turn down such a golden opportunity. At the meeting yesterday, to make a good first impression on the meisters, he had agreed to almost everything Mergwin asked. Now, after a night's sleep in the warm, soft bed of the inn, his mind had finally cleared. He finally realized the burden on his shoulders might not be as light as he'd imagined. Enter the Mia Oasis and you'll see the Stygian priests. This is similar to the belief held by most Westerners that visit the Eastern Tang dynasty, and you'll see soaring sword immortals. They imagine the mysterious Eastern Tang dynasty to be filled with immortals wielding flying swords. However, the truth is, most Chamber of Commerce presidents, in their entire lives traveling the Silk Road, have never encountered a single Eastern continent swordsman. Old Hash led his team into the Black Desert annually, and he visited the Mia Oasis every year, but frankly, a mere mortal like him would avoid the terrifying God's chosen ones, the Stygian priests, and would never have anything to do with these undead creatures. As for the mysterious City of the Dead, even if the caravans of Thebes, traveling for business, knew its location, they wouldn't even bother approaching it. It was a ghost town that existed only in the legends of the free folk, said to contain only ancient, powerful immortals whose souls had been lost. After morning prayers, he glanced back at the prostitutes still soundly asleep on their beds. At that moment, he felt completely uninterested in them. He gently pulled the covers over him and took out a few silver coins, placing them on the bedside table. He dressed and put on his hat, then rubbed his waist and left his guest room. No wonder wealthy bosses often die young. It turns out their spirits suffer such daily torture that even sleeping with women is a source of restlessness. Muttering softly, Hash walked to the balcony of his suite and sat in a wicker chair, gazing out at the empty city below. Based on his understanding of the desert, if Hash truly wanted to find a Styx priest, Memphis would be a better choice than the Mia oasis. Freedmen are human beings too. In any society, capable individuals yearn for a better life. Even a pure-hearted monk, faced with a choice between a bright and clean cathedral and a dark, damp thatched hut, would have no difficulty making the decision. The temple priests must have been no different. The Mia oasis in the Black Desert was indeed habitable, but only barely enough to just barely survive. It was nothing like the city of Memphis, bordering the civilized world. This city had 7 streets, dotted with inns, restaurants, gambling dens, and shops. There were even 2 brothels, one run by the French and the other by the Visigoths. But where should I find them? In previous years, the freedmen from the Black Desert would come back here to buy goods. It wouldn't be difficult to win over a few of them and test the waters, but this year, old Hash gently tapped his burning forehead. The woman's soothing touch didn't ease him, it only added to his irritation. He had found over 100 carts of goods in the Nile riverbed. He had thought it was a windfall, but now it had become a hot potato. With the city completely unable to ship goods, the most profitable option was to turn around and return to Alexandria. But doing so would completely offend the Royal Academy of Sciences. And even more so, the Waldorf family, who had gone to so much trouble to introduce him. Old Hash absolutely could not afford to risk social ruin in the Byzantine merchant world for a few thousand gold coins. I can't just dump the goods in this city. So many merchants have perished in the desert. If I want to continue escorting these 100+ carts of goods into the desert, I need more men, at least 30 more guards to fend off the marauding bandits along the way. Old Hash was a practical man. He never considered that the powerful warrior known as Loki would continue to accompany him into the desert. If he were the true king of Paris, entering Memphis would be a return to civilization. He only needed to send out carrier pigeons, and his vassals would naturally organize reinforcements. Of course, this man wasn't necessarily the legendary king of Paris, perhaps he was just a Viking noble with considerable combat power. Judging by his attire, he didn't look like someone who would risk his life in the desert. Never mind, maybe he's gone by now. Muttering softly, old Hash pulled on his black linen robe and opened the wooden door to the guest room. Leaving his guest room and entering the inn lobby, Hash waved to the maid and was about to order breakfast when 2 tall figures immediately sat down in front of him. One was an old acquaintance of Hash's, Bulgay, the stable captain of the Sand Lake Inn. The other, standing beside him, was a complete stranger. "Who is this?" Hash asked. Sand Lake is a dangerous road. Decades of survival experience had taught Hash a simple truth: unfamiliar faces don't mean opportunities, but rather danger. Hesitantly, Hash was about to extend his right hand to shake the tall young man's hand when Bulgay pulled out his hip flask again and took a deep gulp of liquor. "Brother Hash, I dare you to guarantee that the gold coin you gave me yesterday was the wisest investment of your life, bar none." Bulgay's old face was flushed red from the alcohol, and old Hash felt the urge to curse. If it weren't for his love of wine and gambling, Bulgay had once been a bold and cautious businessman. His incurable addiction limited his prosperous life to just half a century, and he subsequently lost his wife and children. Now, he lives in a cramped inn, tending horses for traveling merchants. The two had been friends for over a decade, and for years, they had lived in peace. Yesterday, he discovered Hash's wealth. The old man had the audacity to bring an outsider into his scheme. Hash narrowed his eyes and was about to slap the drunk, but the chestnut-haired young man beside him took the initiative and extended a firm hand, offering a warm smile. "Boss Hash, don't blame this friend for now. I heard your caravan brothers discussing tomorrow's journey at the casino last night, and this morning I asked Mr. Burge to make an introduction for me. Trust me, give me 5 minutes, and I'll prove to you I have no ill intentions." The chestnut-haired young man smiled warmly. Unlike the traveling merchants who had long eked out a living in the desert, his clothes were immaculately washed, and even his beard was neatly trimmed. Even his demeanor possessed an innate elegance. The two men shook hands, and the chestnut-haired young man then pulled out a business card from his pocket. On it was written his name, Heath Brancher. Chapter 515 Heath's Visit, 2. Ghost Marriage. The first words Heath uttered after returning to the guest room shocked Hash completely. Yes, Master Hash. Heath's gentle smile remained on his face. Let's not mince words. Besides, ever since your caravan entered the city yesterday, every merchant in Memphis has been chanting your name. With my experience, I can't hide anything from you. Hash nodded, continuing to examine the name card in his hand. It was made of wood pulp paper, the kind commonly used by Easterners, and was embellished with fine gold thread. In the center, Heath Brancher's name was written in 3 different scripts: Chinese, Persian, and Latin. Next to it was a simple illustration, sketched with a quill. With just a few strokes, Heath's facial features were meticulously portrayed, and even his gentle smile was vividly conveyed. Looking at Heath again, old Hash had put away all his contempt. A true aristocrat isn't the nouveau riche who wears rings the size of pigeon eggs and consumes 20 plates of hot and cold food at a meal. They conceal their true wealth in these subtle details. Take, for example, the East Continent merchants in Constantinople. Every quarter, Mosey, the head merchant of the Izumo Trading Company, would book an entire street, setting up hundreds of long tables and inviting all the city's merchants to a banquet. At the main table, his brocade robe embroidered with clouds and birds made him appear exceptionally regal. But the attentive old Hashi was keenly aware of the change. Early in the morning, as the guests took their seats, a flock of birds flew in formation above his brocade robe amidst the clouds. However, after 30 drinks, when Mosey, holding his glass, approached Hashi's table and looked at his clothes, the clouds remained, but the birds vanished. The guests were completely baffled as to whether he had unknowingly changed his clothes several times, or whether some sorcerer had secretly enchanted his clothes, sealing a scroll within them. This was the true embodiment of a nobleman who lived a discreet and luxurious life. At first glance, this seemingly ordinary business card looked unremarkable. But a closer look revealed the fine golden threads hidden within the wood pulp paper, or the delicate yet freehand sketches. Every detail of this palm-sized piece of paper revealed intricate design. Glancing at the gentle young man before him, then at the business card in his hand, Hash noticed his profession. Golden Lily Gentlemen's Club. If his suspicions were correct, it was a brothel. And one so expensive he had never heard of it. The nature of his profession necessitated frequenting red light districts for old Hash. On the one hand, capable subordinates needed the occasional reward, and on the other, red light districts were a convenient venue for conducting business. But with old Hash's financial resources, he could only visit the honeysuckle street in the lower part of Constantinople to look for prostitutes. He wouldn't even venture into the luxuriously decorated, pink-hued restaurants with their perfumed perfume wafting through their doors. Throwing gold coins earned with one's life on a woman's belly was an act of extreme waste. This was especially true in a high-end club for top businessmen and members of the Council of Elders. Hash's intuition told him that Heath Brancher wasn't a fraud. His warm smile, kind expression, and every aspect of his demeanor betrayed the unfathomable success of a pimp. Based solely on this one business card, Hash was already convinced of his identity. He bowed and pulled up a chair, and Heath gracefully took his seat. Once Hash was seated, he continued to explain his purpose. 3 months ago, I received a rather strange request. In the final moments of the life of an unnamed councilman, his companions were the 2 canaries in my shop. Hash nodded. These 2 words reinforced his belief that Heath matched the business card he had submitted. Only the uneducated madams of Honeysuckle Street would call their servants whores or whores. In the most exclusive brothels, the owners, dressed in exquisite gowns, would never engage in such self-deprecation. Canary was indeed a common term among the Byzantine upper class. The owners of these brothels had indeed expended considerable resources and manpower to acquire the daughters of the poor and train them in various skills from a young age. Whether in terms of wealth, education, or character, they were far more valuable than the rustic women of Honeysuckle Street. Heath, of course, had no idea what Hash was thinking. He continued, as his life drew to a close, he asked the 2 women who had accompanied him for the rest of his life if they would follow him, and they agreed without hesitation. You know, this kind of profession. Heath paused, and Hash again gestured understanding. As a self-made businessman, Hash knew what life was like for the lower classes. Prostitution was a profession that relied on youth. The age limit for this profession was 16 to 28. After 28, attractive women might still be able to continue prostitution on Honeysuckle Street, but they would definitely not be able to stay in exclusive clubs like the Golden Lily Gentlemen's Club. From Heath's words, old Hash could tell the two women he was talking about had been with the old man for quite some time. Their long life of luxury had essentially dispelled their desire to marry a simple peasant, and being a common streetwalker on Honeysuckle Street was too arduous. Rather than that, they preferred to remain faithful to one man. Women from impoverished backgrounds were already penniless, but to live a life of luxury into their 20s, with a man who deeply loved them, meant they had earned the best years of their lives. The two most important things for prostitutes were reputation. Entering this filthy profession, they cast their honor aside from the moment they entered. Every prostitute would adopt a new name, subconsciously believing they no longer had the dignity to continue to carry the tradition inherited from their ancestors. Within this pit, if a noble lord could grant them a marriage, allowing them to regain a family name, many would accept, even at the cost of death. Meanwhile, marriages between nobles were never entirely their own. No matter how deeply a courtesan loved a prostitute, the counselor could only keep her and provide her with finery, but not any official status. However, a ghost marriage allowed them to hold the title of wife and live together in the afterlife, a blessing for both parties' love. It all sounded bizarre, but upon closer examination, the logic seemed easy to discern. My client is a powerful figure with connections. He knows many outsiders and, years ago, arranged for a Styx priest to perform his burial rites after his death. He had already entered the Temple of Anubis 3 months earlier. The fault of this journey is mine. 2 women are dying, and their return home with their betrothal gifts delayed me considerably. By the time I finally arrived in Memphis, the Styx priest who was supposed to pick me up had already left. To be honest, I've been in this city for 25 days, and during that long period, not a single free citizen has entered from the desert. I don't know what exactly happened here, but I do know that if we don't leave now, it's too late. Brother Hash, you know that those higher-ranking figures are simply not someone you or I can defy. I wouldn't dare return to Constantinople if I accepted their money and failed to get the job done. But then again, I wouldn't dare enter the Black Desert without the guidance of a Styx priest. Heath looked at Hash with a look of sincerity tinged with fear. He mobilized every muscle in his face, striving to keep his expression flawless. Last night, while I was drinking, I happened to hear your caravan enter town. This morning I immediately asked the stabler master to introduce me, along with several guards and 2 of my women. I'll pay you. Just get us to the Mia Oasis, and you'll be fine with the rest. Note, I couldn't find the Tang Dynasty's official term for Egyptians, so I'm using their common term, Dashiren. The Tang called the Arabs Black Dashiren and the Spanish, similarly influenced by Islam, White Dashiren. I'm taking a liberty and having the Tang call the Egyptians Yellow Dashiren. However, this term doesn't actually exist in history. Chapter 516 Heath's Visit, 3. Hash looked at the chestnut-haired young man before him, then glanced at the exquisite purse he held out. It hit the table with a resounding sound, a testament to its heft. Judging by its appearance, it contained at least 50 gold dinars. This nearly covered the entire cost of his trip. Frankly, the price offered by the club owner, Heath Blanche, was not low. Old Hash remained silent. Neither did he take the purse. Instead, he closed his eyes. He reviewed Heath's request and every detail of their meeting. For nearly a minute, a silent silence enveloped the two of them. Admittedly, some merchants will resort to various methods to learn the route through the Black Desert and try to infiltrate the caravans, but no matter how much a peasant transforms, he can never become a noble. If what this Heath Blanche says is true, bringing him into the Black Desert won't create any new competitors. After all, compared to his existing assets, entering the Black Desert is completely unnecessary. I can also gain a friend, and most importantly, this man is clearly very familiar with the Styx priest. Leading him to the Mia Oasis can solve the problem of the Byzantine scholars along the way. Under the guidance of the Styx priest, the Byzantine scholars want to reach Thebes, the city of the dead. All they have to do is follow him, but Hash is Hash after all. He has been able to trade in the Black Desert nearly 100 times and survive every time. His greatest strength is his prudence. He is greedy when he should be greedy. He is not greedy when he shouldn't be. Even if a mountain of gold is placed before him, he knows when to stop. Heath's sudden appearance had only one flaw: it was too perfect. It was as if it had been premeditated. After yesterday's meeting, the two major problems that old Hash had been racking his brains for were easily solved with his arrival. 1. His employer had already found the Stygian priests who would initiate the ghost marriage ritual. This saved him the trouble of searching for these mysterious and dangerous individuals, and the many dangers that might arise in the process. 2. Heath Brancher was the owner of a high-class brothel. For a boss of this rank, money no longer held much allure. Instead, achieving higher social status was the more pressing concern. He needed to please the high-ranking nobles and diligently complete their assigned tasks to secure a path to advancement. This time, Heath entered the Black Desert with not only the 2 prostitutes preparing for the ghost marriage ritual, but also over 20 guards. These were also elite bodyguards from the Byzantine Empire, far superior in combat to the desperate outlaws surrounding Old Hash. Such a perfect person appeared at such a perfect time, such a perfect place. Wasn't it a bit too much of a coincidence? Just when I was feeling hungry, a huge pie fell from my head. How could such a good thing happen? Hash opened his eyes a fraction and glanced at Heath before him again. He could see the tension and forced calm in Heath's eyes. He had a mission to complete, so he was nervous. If he was a trap hunter, wouldn't he be pretending too much? Such a brilliant person would have too many things to do to venture into the deserted desert just to covet my goods. Hash's biggest worry was that one of his men had drunk too much last night and leaked his route to the bandits. To rob them. The bandits had arranged for a seemingly harmless merchant to join their caravan, and when he left Memphis, they would collude with him and commit murder and robbery. Could this happen? Yes, but the probability was low. The freedmen of the Black Desert were not law-abiding and gentle people. They refused to submit to imperial rule, relying on the harsh desert environment to perpetually resist the archons. Freemen would gather together to rob caravans several times a year, but they wouldn't do so unless they were desperate. For one thing, the cargo carried by each caravan was limited. For another, the high-quality steel, weapons, and rare medicinal herbs the freemen needed were unavailable in Memphis. Their only way to obtain them was to bypass the caravan merchants and have them smuggled in for them. Even if desert bandits were targeting them, the chances of them hiring an insider of Heath Brancher's caliber were extremely low. It was like 2 African tribes at war hiring a wealthy merchant from the Red Kingdom as an insider, utterly illogical. At this point, after a long period of reflection, Old Hash had largely concluded that this man had no ulterior motives. A merchant who spent his entire life practicing caution would inevitably have a limited potential. When greed was an option, he wouldn't hesitate. If fulfilling the scholar's wishes was the paramount principle of this business trip, bringing Heath Brancher with him would be the safest option. He smiled as he accepted the commission and shook hands with Heath. Mr. Heath, let's be friends. You understand the dangers of the Black Desert. My men will do their utmost to ensure your safety, but there are still many unexpected events in the desert that could take your life at any time. Of course, I must also personally meet with all members of your team, the 20 guards, the accompanying personnel, and even your several slave girls, of course, but rest assured, Boss Hash, these are brothers who have been with me for over a decade. They are trustworthy, both in terms of their military prowess and their loyalty. The inn servants duly brought them breakfast, and the two chatted while they ate. During this time, Hash confided that there were several Byzantine scholars in his caravan, and if possible, they would be encouraged to enter Thebes, the city of the dead, as his own men. Don't worry, Boss Hash. I've been doing business in Constantinople for years, and I know what kind of people these scholars are, Heath agreed with a smile. Their attention is always on some very strange things. When we meet, they can change into guard uniforms and pretend to be my guards and travel with me. I only ask to deliver these 2 canaries to the city of the dead, and that way, I'll have fulfilled the trust of my financier. You have no idea how much effort this journey has taken on me. I sincerely hope this nightmare will soon be over, and I can return to my warm bed in Constantinople. There was a knock on the door, and Heath gestured to Hash to calm down. Don't worry, boss, these must be my men. He swallowed his food in a few mouthfuls and opened the wooden door. A group of sturdy warriors in plain white robes filed in. Between them stood 2 women wrapped in plain gray gauze. Leading them was the legalist assassin, Concubine Zoo. Chapter 517 Heath's Visit, 4. Yesterday afternoon, upon discovering Old Hash's caravan entering Memphis City, Concubine Zoo and her 2 companions immediately realized the plan had gone terribly wrong. The victor of this battle should have been the Arab Crescent merchants, with their advantageous timing, location, and people. They had never expected these greasy, brown-skinned, bearded men to be so weak. Despite their calculated tactics, and armed with secret intelligence provided by concubine Zhu, they were effectively defeated by the ever-sincerity, ultimately benefiting from a passing group of caravan merchants. An unfamiliar encounter is the last thing an assassin wants. Before entering the city, concubine Zhu's team had thoroughly researched both the crescent merchants and the ever-sincerity. Regardless of which side emerged victorious in this clash, they had ample countermeasures. However, the arrival of an unfamiliar group disrupted their plans. Concubine Zhu immediately shifted her strategy, sending Heath Brancher into the city to gather intelligence on Hash's caravan under the guise of a conversation. Upon learning they were merely an ordinary caravan of merchants, concubine Zhu led her team into the inn. Upon entering, she abruptly halted her operation. She spotted a tall, white figure who should not have been there. Loki Starrig, the king of Paris, the Illuminati's target, a 5-year-old girl from the East Continent, was in Loki's grasp, and the two shared a guest room. Concubine Zhu didn't recognize many rulers from the Western Continent, but the name of Loki, the king of Paris, had become incredibly famous in recent years. He had slain Mewtwo, the king of Earthsea, in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses, and by then, bards had spun him into a terrifying legend. A head-on confrontation with such a figure was not for the wise. After the operation was aborted, concubine Zhu dispatched Seath to gather information within the inn's guest room. That night, Seath uncovered two crucial pieces of information for her. 1. Old Hash was leading the Misters in a search for the City of the Dead. 2. Loki had been coerced into the situation, completely unaware of the girl's true identity. At this point, the team spent the night planning their next strategy. They decided to infiltrate the Hashma caravan under the pretext of a ghost marriage. Tankai and I created a new identity for Heath overnight. He also disguised Luma and Zufei as two sacrificial offerings accompanying Heath into the desert. The four of them, along with several Western maids and guards, successfully infiltrated the Hashma caravan. The journey from Memphis to the Mia Oasis, where the Styx ritual took place, would take 12 to 15 days. Zufei's team planned to use this time to secretly approach Loki and see if they could peacefully retrieve the soul offering from him. She established two guidelines for this operation. First, avoid making an enemy of Loki unless necessary. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If the Illuminati had to choose one person to eliminate immediately, it would be the King of Paris. All emerging political powers rely on allies in their interstate relations. The legalist mentor had only recently ascended to power, and few factions in the Western continent could be considered friends. If this trip could win over the newly crowned King of Normandy, it would be a huge bonus. Second, everyone must play their roles well. Unless faced with a life or death crisis, do not easily reveal your true strength. The true meaning of a sword lies not in revealing, but in concealing. In any operation, an assassin must be like a vine in the bush, stealthily climbing, wrapping around other plants, and striving to conceal their presence. Thus, the scene of her, wearing a plain veil, following the Western warrior into the room occurred. Tankai and I had managed to stay in the Illuminati until the age of 40, still working on the front lines of the mission. His skills in disguise were exceptional. It's well known that the Eastern Tang dynasty never sold women to prostitutes. He disguised concubine Zhu, who had a darker complexion, to resemble a Sogdian woman. As for Huamei, who had a fairer complexion, he cleverly altered her facial features to make her appear as a high-caste Indian Aryan. The already flawless makeup, coupled with the almost constant veil covering their heads, made everything appear flawless. Their alien identities also masked their somewhat shaky Latin. Sophie and the other woman, well aware of the dangers of excessive talk, didn't interact much with old Hash. Hash's gaze lingered only briefly upon the two women. He showed no surprise that the women buried with them were not from the Western continent. The tastes of noble men can sometimes be quite peculiar. When life is pampered, many prefer to try the pleasures of exotic women. This was considered normal in Byzantine aristocracy. A life of excessive affluence and a daily routine free of labor can foster quirks that are incomprehensible to ordinary people. Homosexuality is not uncommon, let alone these exotic women. Hash's focus was more on the guards who escorted the two men into the room than on the two women. Directly in front of everyone, Tankai and I stood at the forefront, his sword hilt in hand. Despite his age, the calmness in his eyes gave Hash a strange sense of peace. That afternoon, old Hash summoned all the caravan members who were wandering around the city. For several days, they gathered food and water, fed the horses, and prepared for another long journey. The Meesters were unable to assist in these tasks. During this time, the Meesters, led by Mergwin, simply lived in the inn. The day before their departure, they welcomed a stranger. Chapter 518 The Origin of the Girl, 1. When Loki entered the chambers where the scholars lived, Mergwin instinctively took a few steps back. Having spent most of his life in the world of slaughter, Loki exuded an aura that was unfamiliar to the scholars. It was like gazing upon a champion gladiator in the Colosseum, and it subconsciously made her feel a sense of danger. Miss Mergwin, don't be too alarmed by the sight of me. I mean no harm. Upon entering the room, Loki immediately recognized Emma's sister. The Waldorf family of Constantinople was incredibly wealthy, but the women in the family were generally of average appearance. While plain looks might be acceptable, noble ladies could always redeem themselves through makeup and fancy clothes. But Emma and Mergwin were both scholars dedicated to scholarship. Emma, with her short hair and leather clothing, dressed like a man. Seeing her sister, Loki immediately recognized her from her dense freckles that she was a Waldorf daughter. He untied the bloody axe slung from his back and stood at the doorway, then bared his hands and walked into the room. Though we have never met, I am somewhat of an acquaintance of the Waldorf family. 16 years ago, your sister and I embarked on a rather interesting adventure together. Loki pointed to the ancient tomes in her hand. I recognize these. If my guess is correct, these are the spoils your sister saved from the Cyclops' pursuit. These two words eased the slightly tense atmosphere in the suite. Loki entered and sank down on the sofa. Upon hearing him explain the origins of the ancient tome in his hand, Mergwin was already half convinced of his identity. Her only remaining concern was her confusion as to why the renowned king of Paris had mysteriously appeared in Memphis. As their conversation continued, and when Loki again mentioned the Viking princess, Merindin, she felt almost certain that his identity was genuine. Merindin was now a completely different person. Leveraging potions, whale oil, dragon bones, and the trade routes of Scandinavia and the Siberian wastes, she achieved her dream of becoming one of the 42 members of the Byzantine Senate and even had the wherewithal to compete for the position of president of the Byzantine Chamber of Commerce. 13 years of lost memories had obscured Merindin's true strength. However, his understanding of her character convinced him that she would not, like her brother, remain confined to the cold of Scandinavia. The frozen earth and the small population of Vikings could not sustain her ambitions. She would inevitably seek a path closer to the center of power in the western continent. Mergwin's answer perfectly confirmed his suspicions. As a young student in Byzantium, the Waldorf family had provided considerable assistance. Although her reputation had been damaged by the joint invasion of England and the Slavs over a decade earlier, she had successfully risen from the ashes and returned to Byzantium thanks to the shining star that was Loki. Her record certainly had its fair share of blemishes, but her current backer was the renowned king of Paris. Let alone the deaths of a few investors, even if she murdered members of the royal family, as long as she could bring sufficient benefits to the Chamber of Commerce, this trade-based city would always welcome her. Mentioning the name of Merindin and detailing the past collaboration, even the astute Mergwin could immediately discern the truth. He was none other than the king of Paris who had slain the gods within the very heart of Paris. Lord Loki, you haven't come to us to reminisce, have you? Is there anything you can help me with? Meester's time is precious, so they're accustomed to getting straight to the point. With the increasing number of prominent figures appearing in the Academy district in recent years, the sheer number of emperors has made it difficult for them to maintain or when meeting anyone. Loki, however, didn't mind. With a thud, he dropped a sack from his shoulder to the ground, and several eerie howls emanated from within. As he opened the sack, the chain girl from the East Continent emerged. I heard the porters casually mention over drinks that there's a meester among you who specializes in semiotics. If so, could you help me see what's painted on this girl's body? The Citadel sent 8 meesters on this mission, including Mergwin, a scholar of ancient civilizations. The other meester standing beside her was a pale, clean-shaven man in his 30s. His name was Sisyphus. His most striking feature was the 4 gleaming golden meester badges adorning his chest. These included surgery, theology, potionology, and even a panda emblem representing Eastern medicine. It was obvious that he was a physician under the Citadel. Physicians were one of the largest groups within the Royal Academy, and the medical field was the only area within the Citadel where they could directly challenge the Holy Episcopal Brothers. The Holy Episcopal Brothers' medical services primarily focused on holy light spells. Within the cathedral, the pathways of holy light provided free holy light healing to the faithful of their respective parishes. While free of charge, the quality of medical care provided by the chosen varied widely, and not all received the treatment they needed on time. The citadel took a different approach, establishing specialized hospitals. While these hospitals were paid facilities, they housed numerous physicians dedicated solely to healing and saving lives. In recent years, with the increasing number of medical scholars within the Royal Academy, the citadel's hospitals have spread throughout the Byzantine Empire, and there's even a tendency to expand beyond them. Oh, you're a doctor, that's good. Can you help me understand why this girl is so energetic despite not eating or drinking for 3 days? Sicilian Fox, born in the Apennines, had a gentle expression. Seeing Loki's promise, he gently took the girl's slender arm. He extended his finger and lightly tapped the air before him. Like a devout Catholic, he swiftly formed the sign of the cross. A flash of pure white holy light flashed from the sky, falling like tiny stars around the girl. The light converged on her skin, but could not travel any further. The sight deeply shocked Loki. He discovered that not all the scholars in the citadel were blind believers like Emma Waldorf. The holy light spell displayed by the SYNOPSIS before him clearly indicated that he was a chosen one of the holy bishop's path of holy light, and his rank was not low. This was only the beginning of his astonishment. SYNOPSIS frowned, inwardly wondering, as he noticed the girl's body subconsciously repelling the holy light. The next moment, he reached into his bosom and pulled out a wand of ancient design. It might be called a wand, but it was emerald green. Resembling a branch freshly broken from a tree trunk, its tip carved into the shape of a flying bird. He slowly waved the wand, and a stream of green light flowed from his palm. Pure spiritual energy converged at the wand's tip, and the once stiff bird transformed into an emerald green spirit, fluttering its wings and flying towards the girl. However, like the holy light falling from the sky, the bird quickly dissipated like a moth to a flame when it approached the girl. Chapter 519 The Origin of the Girl, 2. 14 years ago, while leading the Vikings westward across the English Isles, Loki once gazed upon Stonewood County and heard legends of the Celtic Druids. Before the Saxons reached the islands, the Celts were the original inhabitants. Their outer god, Massonuk, was a bizarre creature with a human head and a centaur body. In an era when giants and dragons dominated the planet, alongside these behemoths, numerous other creatures of diverse forms roamed the surface. Massonuk centaurs were one such tribe. These powerful centaurs, along with their woodland dryads, female centaurs are called dryads, and leprechauns relied on the coastline and the lush forests of the three islands to successfully resist the invasion of giants and dragons. They excelled in various natural magics. The most astonishing of these was their ability to manipulate the element of earth, causing inanimate stone to grow like trees, transforming to their desired shapes. Over time, dragons, giants, and countless other ancient monsters were nearly wiped out by the slaughter of the ancient people. After the centaurs and woodland dryads vanished, the ancient people, reduced to mortals, rebuilt temples and studied the ancient stone tablets they had left behind, practicing their inherited natural magic. These humans called themselves druids, meaning people of natural growth in Old English. They reshaped the landscape at will, coexisted peacefully with the woodland animals, and spent their days cultivating flowers and trees for pleasure. One can imagine the fate of the Celts facing the Saxons, wielding fine iron and bows. The Druids, unskilled in combat, were decimated and eventually retreated to the deserted northern islands. After Loki successfully conquered the Saltires and Stonewoodshares and established the Normandy region, he attempted to find the last descendants of the Druids. However, the vastness of the land and the sparse population made his searches fruitless. Unexpectedly, the first time he witnessed natural magic, it was actually performed by a citadel scholar. This man not only skillfully harnessed psychic energy, but also simultaneously cultivated two distinct power systems. In that instant, Loki understood why the Church of the Holy Archbishops viewed the scholars as enemies. They had achieved remarkable research results. In some ways, they were even more powerful than the monks of the Eastern continent. Monks channeled energy into their bodies, deliberately abandoning all belief in the gods. Meanwhile, the scholars were able to view all the established facts of the world with a normal mind. They codified all the systems incomprehensible to humans into disciplines, devoting manpower and resources to exploring the underlying laws. A medical scholar could effortlessly perform healing spells from both the Holy Bishop and Celtic Druid traditions. In time, The scholars would surely develop their own unique combat power through their various research findings. At this point, the once popular holy bishop would inevitably fall from grace. While Loki was lost in thought, Mergwin had already stepped forward. The girl knew she had no hope of escape from Loki's presence, so she no longer concealed her true nature. Baring her canine teeth, she stared at Mergwin with a ferocious expression, speaking a strange language that didn't exist. Mergwin firmly grasped her arm, examining the mysterious writing on it. It's hieroglyphics, but it's much older. Loki, this isn't the hieroglyphics used by the ancient Egyptian nobles. It's the Hades script used by the Styx priests when they compiled the Book of the Dead. Mergwin traced the dark, mysterious characters with her fingers, forming her own conclusion in just 10 seconds. 5,000 years ago, writing was the exclusive domain of the nobility, large slave owners, and temple priests. Within the ancient Egyptian kingdom, writing was even considered a form of artistic expression, on par with painting and dance. However, the Stygian priests used a completely different language. Before entering the grave, mortals would enter the temple of Anubis to undergo a reincarnation ritual. Stygian priests would seal their bodies based on their achievements in life, compiling a book of the dead for each individual and placing it within the coffin. It's rumored that this is the language used by Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld. Mergwin carefully examined the writing on the girl's body, but found no familiar characters on the intricate black ink patterns painted on her skin. This fact also left scholars of ancient civilizations feeling rather baffled. All the information the Citadel could gather was from the Book of the Dead, buried beneath the sands. This document, in reverse, contained only the biographies of the deceased. The 3 ancient books Emma brought from the obsidian pyramid were 3 maps. This was all the information Mergwin could obtain on Egyptian Hades. With everyone present at a loss, their gazes turned to an elderly man in a linen robe in the corner of the room. He was the only person in the room without a badge on his chest. He wore a simple linen robe, and when he looked up, his dark eyes revealed a tranquility as if time had stood still. He was from the East Continent. His name was Hosan. In the Middle Ages, there were also poor people in the East Continent. Most of them were as illiterate as the peasants of the West. Born into the whole family, the third son of the same family, Hosan earned his name. As he grew older, people began to add the character Yi to the end of his name. The scholars generally addressed him as Yi, Master Hosan. Loki's first impression of him was that he resembled Gu Chanking, whom he had seen in the Blood Mist illusion, or Feng Huzi, Wind Swan, in Leviathan's bowels. They both carried the aura of a cultivator, though undoubtedly much weaker. Since the Lushan rebellion broke out in 755 AD, over 10 million people died in the war within the Eastern Tang dynasty within a decade. The turbulent times forced many monks, unwilling to meddle in political struggles, to seek more stable living environments. They began migrating to the Western continent with their families. By AD 810, the Byzantine Empire had already attracted a significant number of Eastern continental people. Hosan had been in the academy for only 2 years, but within those 2 years, he had achieved remarkable mastery in talismans and formations. The chief scholars speculated that he must be a senior disciple of the Zhuanghang school, perhaps even a registered disciple of Giguzi. However, rumors were just rumors, and Hosan himself never personally confirmed his origins. Most of the time, he lived alone in his tower, accompanied only by the ancient scroll and a few other chief scholars. The crowd dispersed, and the old man stood up and slowly walked over to the girl. 10 minutes ago. As Seraphis cast spells of holy light and nature, the girl's calm gaze remained unwavering. However, when Hosan walked towards her, her eyes dodged and her whole body began to tremble uncontrollably. Haha, I never thought that we could meet again here. A kind smile appeared on Hosan's old face. Gently pulling the slender arm, he ignored the girl's violent trembling and lightly touched the ink on the girl's arm with his dry fingers. There was no spell, nor any magic. One complex seal after another crawled on the girl's body like a tide. Hosan suddenly turned around and looked at Loki, who was standing on the side. The restrictions drawn by the formation master can only be changed by oneself. The formation on her body recognized me, which means my memory is correct. This is the dark soul that I sealed personally 3 years ago. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 520 The Origin of the Girl. 3. As all large religions and secret societies expand and the power centers begin to disperse, offshoots emerge. Within the Holy Church, there's the Silent Sisters, who oversee the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Inquisition, which judges heretics, the Blood Martyrs, composed entirely of ascetic monks, and the Crusaders, a specialized combat force. Within the Zoroastrianism, each of the 5 Cinder Lords commands its own army. Archbishop Sassas, Pope of Jerusalem, commands his own secret force, the Firefly Swarm. The Firebearers command their elite ace, the Fire Stealers. Agnes the Unburnt commands the spellcaster Sons of the Flame Demon. And within the Zoroastrianism, the Whitewasher, the intelligence chief who connects the 5 Cinder Lords, also commands his own secret corps, the Shadow of the Eclipse. It's conceivable that a flourishing legalist school within the Eastern Tang dynasty would also be divided into several factions. 2 years ago, the third Lord of Fire had not yet crossed the sea to Byzantium. At that time, Hosanna belonged to the inspectorate unit under the legalist school. The legalist ruler's philosophy of governance was simple. Under their rule, the people were expected to obey the state's call unconditionally. They vigorously suppressed people's demands, demanding that everyone be precisely assigned their proper position and provide all possible assistance to the state. A key method to enhance this ruling style was the neighborhood inspection system implemented by the inspectorate. This system of governance fully exploited the inherent evil of human nature. It was precisely on this point that the legalists clashed radically with the Confucians. In the minds of Confucians, loyalty, righteousness, and filial piety were paramount. Confucianism advocated a father's son's cover-up and a wife's husband's cover-up, emphasizing that wives and fathers had an obligation to protect their families even in the face of faults. Only by loving others could one love oneself. However, in the eyes of the legalists, this was considered treasonous. Legalists encouraged surveillance among neighbors, and even between husbands and wives. If you reported your neighbor for breaking the law, you would not only inherit his property but also receive a government reward and be exempted from taxes. A wife who reported her husband for breaking the law would not only avoid the death penalty but also retain a portion of the family property. Naturally, such practices made everyone shudder at the mere mention of the law, forcing everyone to bow their heads and live cautiously. However, this extremely strict, iron-fisted law also had unexpected benefits. When every individual in a state was under constant surveillance, secret societies had nowhere to hide. The first to be eradicated was the Zoroastrianism, which had lurked within the Tang dynasty for centuries. Since the Qing prosperity, Emperor Xuanzong Lilongji had maintained an open attitude toward foreigners. However, excessive indulgence naturally led to numerous problems. For years, countless members of the Zoroastrianism gang had operated within the imperial court and underground, secretly selling numerous state secrets. From small-scale reports of shortages and natural disasters in prefectures and counties to major news about the movements of generals, the fire spreaders were able to accurately transmit information to the Turks, Tibetans, and even as far afield as Sogdia and Tocharian. The overseer's response to these information peddlers was once discovered, the entire family will be executed. Once the neighborhood inspection system was established, the Zoroastrianism was completely crippled within just 2 months. However, under these circumstances, the Illuminati, a secret society even more deeply hidden within the Tang Empire, persisted. Unlike the Zoroastrianism, the Illuminati recruited members by targeting the upper echelons of the major kingdoms or exceptionally powerful followers of the gods. Illuminati members naively believed that the legalist mentors were truly the useful pawns of the rulers, as they appeared to be. However, they realized that the legalists were dangerous enemies with no moral compass. They were completely different from the upright Confucian mentors, who could sign a contract respectfully one moment and then turn hostile the next, drawing their swords and killing people. Everyone within the organization prioritized completing the mission. No one cared how the mission was accomplished or what twists and turns occurred along the way. The girl Loki had captured from the Hangchang ship was codenamed Evil Child in the legalist mentors roster. She was born in a mountain village 13 miles outside Zufu, Henan province. The girl was originally safe because her entire village of 76 households had been bribed by the Illuminati. However, there's no such thing as a completely impenetrable wall. The Illuminati could bribe a village, but not an entire provincial capital. The powerful neighborhood check system prevented the girl's existence from being revealed. In the second year of the Yuan era, A group of merchants passing through the village selling dates camped outside the village. At night, a vagrant working as a handyman for the date vendors slipped into the village, intending to steal a chicken to cook and add to the meaty atmosphere. Unexpectedly, upon entering a farmyard, he saw steam rising from a window. The vagrant's eyes immediately lit up. In such a remote mountain village, the windows were inlaid with glass from the western kingdom of Fuelin. Note, the Tang people called Byzantium Fuelin, indicating that this must be a wealthy family. Women in wealthy families, free from farm labor, possessed delicate skin and a snow-white complexion. The rising steam likely indicated that a lady or young lady was bathing again. The idle man immediately approached the glass, only to be met with a scene that completely defied his expectations. Several blonde, blue-eyed Westerners held a newborn baby girl, barely the size of an adult's palm. A baby of that age should only cry and nurse. However, the infant in the Western men's arms spoke in a strange, babyish voice, speaking an unfamiliar language. Her facial expression was completely different from the expected innocence of a child. Her clear, large eyes sparkled with wisdom, rivaling even the oldest storyteller in Chang'an. The idle man spent his days wandering around Chang'an, earning a living as a hanger-on for the wealthy. Although illiterate, his workplace had always been the residences of high-ranking officials. He frequented casinos and taverns in his free time, listening to countless stories from storytellers. The number of Westerners serving in the Tang dynasty's prefectures and cities had dwindled significantly since before the Anxi Rebellion. The number of these yellow-haired foreigners in the imperial city wasn't numerous, but their presence in a barren mountain village in Henan province was even more bizarre. Their mere presence in the village was already eerie, and they respectfully held the young girl in their hands, listening to the strange language she spoke. This scene held a lingering sense of horror. The idler didn't stay, not even to rejoin his group. He traveled through the night to Shuzhou and report the incident to the prefect. He was incredibly lucky. He arrived just as the old prefect had resigned and the new one had taken over the government for only 2 days. The Illuminati hadn't had time to bribe him yet. The trusted prefect of Shuzhou was named Zibaojin. Coming from humble beginnings, he was a resolute killer, well-versed in handling such treacherous situations. He chose not to alert the enemy, but instead dispatched the legalist monitoring team to observe secretly for several days. Upon discovering the incident, he remained silent. Instead, he pulled a chosen individual from the Zoroastrian witch path from death row and tasked her with using her witch's dream ability to extract intelligence from the Westerners' minds. The chosen individuals of the witch path possessed only the ability to enter dreams. Physically, they were no different from mortals. After being infused with a sufficient dose of poison, the witch obediently followed Zibaojin's orders in order to obtain the antidote. However, Zibaojin, a novice in officialdom, still underestimated the capabilities of these Illuminati followers. The Westerners hiding in the mountain village were all highly skilled chosen, many even reaching the demigod realm. A Sequence 5 dream witch of the witch path would struggle immensely to penetrate their consciousness, let alone communicate with their personalities within their dreams. The witch lay in hiding for 7 days, her only intelligence coming from the Illuminati's groom. From him, she learned that the Westerners had located the baby girl before her birth. They had given her biological parents a large sum of gold and silver, successfully purchasing the baby and the ancestral home from them. Then, the idler saw the scene he witnessed when he entered the village. Zibaojin didn't know their exact motives, but he knew that during a time of national turmoil, the Westerners wouldn't waste such vast resources and manpower on such an insignificant undertaking. Based on the intelligence he had gathered, this matter was beyond the capacity of a mere prefecture governor relying on a few hundred soldiers. Without hesitation, Zibaojin reported the matter to the legalist mentors. According to standard practice, after the ruling party discovers a secret society lurking within the nation and observes it for a sufficient period of time, they will inevitably seize and apprehend it. The routine then unfolded: torture, interrogation, and the exposure of accomplices. However, the legalist mentors' minds seemed to be wired differently. When they discovered that the Illuminati had been lurking within the Eastern Tang dynasty for hundreds of years, their sole mission tied to a newborn girl, the legalist supervisor, codenamed Ghost Master, sensed something amiss. First, this covert network consisted of no fewer than 100 provincial nobles. They frequently traveled between provinces daily, daring not to neglect their work even during times of war or cholera. Even more remarkable was the fact that they knew they were under surveillance. For 3 months, all Illuminati members had been able to evacuate without incident. When they realized the government was merely monitoring them, not taking action, they remained in the village, knowing they would die. Only then did Ghostmaster finally recover. They were a group of death-defying warriors, willing to sacrifice their own lives to complete their mission. He had tracked. By the time the legalist supervisory corps arrived, the Illuminati had already completed the massacre of the village. They, dressed in uniform, had already formed a vast formation within the valley using blood, cinnabar, iron filings, and salt. Nearly 100 Illuminati followers surrounded the formation, raised their hands, looked toward the sky, and chanted complex incantations. Rich spiritual energy emanated from each of them, amplified by the magic circle and gathered at the center. Standing silently at the center of the vast formation was the Donglu girl standing before Hosanai. 2 years ago, the girl was a toddler, barely learning to stand and walk. When Hosanai, one of the 7 deacons of the Overwatch Corps, led his team into the valley, the Illuminati's spell was already in its final stages. Amidst the burning iron and salt, Hosanai could clearly sense a thick aura of death emanating from the girl's body. It felt as if a terrifying undead creature was about to break free from her body. Hosanai now faced 2 choices. 1. Decapitate the girl with a single blow, ending this horrific ritual once and for all. 2. Risking his life, he unleashed the soul-sealing technique inherited from the School of Diplomacy, creating a soul-sealing formation on the girl's body. This would preserve the girl's life. The inspectors had already drawn their weapons and were engaged in a tug-of-war with the Illuminati. The valley was now awash in shouts and cries of killing, a chaotic scene. Master Hosan knew the safest course was to end the girl's life immediately. However, he was not a true disciple of the legalist school. Having spent half his life in the School of Diplomacy, the Confucian teacher's ideals of benevolence had been etched deep into his soul. Amidst that blood-red hell, he calmly drew his brush, stroke by stroke, sealing the girl's wailing soul, which struggled to escape. Ultimately, relying on his solid foundation and a good deal of luck, Master Hosan successfully sealed the girl's restless soul. It was obvious that the legalist teachers would not appreciate his last-minute decision. For the sake of a newborn stranger girl, he disregarded the safety of hundreds of his men, stubbornly pursuing his own benevolent intentions. This perfectly embodies what the legalist teachers define as idiot justice. Only through fire can the true quality of steel be revealed. Even a kind-hearted individual like Hosanai, no matter how formidable his abilities, could not continue to live under the rule of the legalist teachers. Considering his merits during his years of service, his demerits offset his merits, and he was expelled from the Overwatch Corps. Hosanai remained remarkably calm about this matter. He cared deeply about this great nation, and when it faced hardship, he decisively joined the Overwatch Corps, contributing his own strength to its stability. He had never sought fame or fortune, so he didn't mind the shattering of his years of hard work. At the same time, he held no resentment towards his legalist teachers. As one of the 7 deacons of the Overwatch, Hosanai knew many of the legalist school's secrets. After leaving the team, the mentors didn't activate the legalist assassins to hunt him down, which was already a special favor to him. Even when they learned he wanted to leave the Tang dynasty and live in Byzantium, a former companion specially delivered him a certificate of passage as he boarded the ship to pass through the customs. 5 years ago, Master Hosan had no idea what would become of the girl whose soul he had sealed. In his wildest dreams, he could not have imagined that they would meet again in the city on the edge of the desert, under different identities. He narrowed his eyes and cautiously regarded Loki, who had brought the girl in. Chapter 521 The Origin of the Girl. 4. Everyone could be a member of the Illuminati. Except for Loki Starrig, the god killer. In the past decade, nearly everyone living in the Mediterranean countries had heard the legend of Loki leading the frost giants in battle against the Illuminati leader. Fire Master Sanai, reclusive within the spire of the citadel, had naturally heard of him. This man couldn't be an Illuminati spy. He had slain one of the Illuminati's 12 leaders with his axe in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses. If this was a self-torture tactic, the price seemed too high. Besides, had these Westerners ever read Sun Tzu's Art of War, the circulated text within the diplomatic school, and how could they possibly understand the concept of self-torture? After a brief hesitation, he decided to tell everyone his story about the girl's origins. Partly because the mysterious girl's origins were extremely strange, and partly because he was no longer serving the legalists. After crossing west to the Byzantine Empire, the scholars treated him with courtesy. During this journey into the Black Desert, several Grand Masters visited him daily, explaining the significance of this journey. Not only would it ensure the Citadel's future status, but it would also allow mortals to gain a clearer understanding of the rules governing this land. Only then did he agree to join the expedition. The reappearance of the girl brought back countless memories, bringing back the horrific Advent ceremony in the valley 5 years prior. The bloodshed and slaughter that followed, leaving the ground strewn with blood and severed limbs. Fire Third Master finished his story, and the misters paused. The girl looked at him with a hint of amusement, then gently extended her hands in a clap. Clearly, this was a mockery from the unknown evil spirit within her. My last memory of this girl was when I handed her over to Gu Huayan, the Grand Commander of the Overseer Legion. After that, I left the Eastern Continent. I have no idea what happened next. Loki frowned. Based on his understanding of the situation, the girl was likely harboring an extremely powerful demon. The Illuminati, following her orders, slaughtered the villagers, constructed intricate formations, and performed birth rituals, all with the ultimate goal of allowing the girl's soul to return to the world. But Master Hosanai thwarted all this. Using a sealing array from the School of Diplomacy, Master Hosanai sealed the restless soul within the girl's body. This sealing spell, derived from the School of Diplomacy, significantly suppressed the spirit's psychic energy, effectively preventing him from unleashing much of his divine power. Loki was more interested in the Illuminati's ability to locate the village where the girl was born. If the Illuminati possessed such means, they would have located the girl's parents before her birth, then purchased her from them through a gold and silver transaction. The technical sophistication involved was far greater than the narrative might suggest. If all this is true, maybe, does the underworld really exist? Where do people go after death? This has been a question that has plagued human civilization for ages. Even in the prosperous 21st century, many people are still conducting research in this area. The most convincing and widely accepted among them is Eben Alexander, a brain surgeon from the Lighthouse Country. On November 10, 2008, Eben did not wake up after falling asleep. His wife noticed his unusual behavior and immediately contacted the hospital where he worked. After emergency treatment, doctors discovered that he had a disease called bacterial meningitis. This disease has a mortality rate of over 90%, and even if cured, it can cause serious sequelae. After 3 days of emergency treatment, Eben showed no improvement. Just when everyone was about to give up on treatment, a miracle occurred on the 7th day. Eben woke up. Not only did he wake up, but he also became the only person in the world to recover from bacterial meningitis without any sequelae, without any medication. When he awoke under the watchful eyes of dozens of doctors, Eben didn't panic. His first action was to put on his glasses and check the nearby electroencephalogram recorder, carefully observing any abnormal brain activity over the past 7 days. Finding none, he shared his observations with his colleagues. That same night, while still at home, he was already dead. He could sense his soul ascending into a pitch-black tunnel. When he regained consciousness, he found himself standing on an empty plain, surrounded by countless spirits identical to himself wandering aimlessly. Just then, a young woman approached him and spoke a strange language he couldn't understand. He then returned to the living world. Eben Alexander's near-death experience became the only case of a near-death experience published in the medical journal The Lancet. This was particularly remarkable because, despite this highly fatal illness, he hadn't suffered any lasting effects. On the other hand, Eben himself is a rare atheist in the Lighthouse Country. He doesn't believe in the Holy Spirit and wasn't baptized at birth. Even more scientific is the series of procedures he underwent after waking up. Why did he first check the EEG recorder? Because he needed to confirm that he wasn't dreaming while in a deep coma. This was a calm and scientific approach. But the story doesn't end here. The truly outrageous events wouldn't be discovered until he left the hospital. Because of widespread faith in the Holy Spirit, abortion is prohibited in the Lighthouse Country. Many high school students, driven by their faith, feel compelled to give birth to their unborn children after an unexpected pregnancy. If they are unable to raise the child themselves, social welfare agencies will place the child with a capable parent. High school students can continue their studies and maintain visitation rights whenever they wish, maintaining contact with their foster family. Eben was one such child raised in a foster home. He didn't inherit his biological parents' names, but instead took the surname Alexander from his adoptive parents. After he was released from the hospital, 3 long years passed, and his body remained in good health. One day, 3 years later, his adoptive parents, due to health issues, wanted to see their eldest son, whom they had sent away in high school, before they died. Eben, then in his 50s, saw his biological parents for the first time. Even more astonishing, he entered their home and found a 20-year-old girl in a photo album in the hallway. This girl was exactly the same girl he had seen standing on the plane, filled with spirits after his death. Even after 3 long years, Eben could still clearly remember every detail of his near-death experience. He asked his biological parents, who were now over 70 years old, about a younger sister. They had married after graduating from high school, and after starting work, they had their first daughter. However, this daughter did not survive, killed in a car accident at the age of 20. It was precisely because of their near-death experience, childless, that they longed to see their eldest son again. Eben was horrified. After returning home, he finally realized how valuable his near-death experience was, so he began writing and successfully published a best-selling book called Evidence of Heaven, which detailed the ins and outs of this near-death experience and attempted to find a breakthrough in biology and even theology on the issue of death. Chapter 522 The Origin of the Girl, 5. Nefertiti had long ago stated that the Styx priests of the Temple of Anubis could travel between the yin and yang realms through a specific method. If the underworld and Asgard were both planes accessible through portals, then if the Illuminati could penetrate Asgard, they could certainly penetrate the underworld as well. Nefertiti had previously expressed her conviction that death leads to the underworld. Before this scene unfolded, Loki had dismissed this as the ignorant imagination of the emperors of ancient slave societies. But now it seemed that this might not be false. Several of the world's oldest civilizations harbored legends of the afterlife, the most prominent being ancient Egypt. From kings to serfs, there was a degree of death worship. Followers of the ancient gods firmly believed that they were born to suffer, and that truly meaningful life began after death. This was also true in ancient India. The belief system of the 6 paths of reincarnation, founded by the Lord of Life, Kasyapa, was closely tied to death. After death, whether one becomes a demon, an animal, an asura, or a celestial being, whatever form one takes must be more powerful than the mortal body. This is also true of Chinese civilization. As of 2021, a considerable number of Chinese still firmly believe that their deceased relatives reside in a realm called the underworld. During every festival, Chinese people visit graves to burn paper and offer money to relatives in the underworld. These ancient civilizations share 3 common beliefs. 1. They firmly believe in the immortality of the soul after death. 2. They believe that spirits possess superhuman abilities. 3. They all believe in the existence of an underworld plane similar to the human world. If the underworld plane truly exists, and if the Illuminati have infiltrated Asgard, they are likely to have spread throughout the underworld by now. Only in this way, through internal and external collaboration, can they accurately determine the destination of a particular soul. They found the baby girl's family before she was born. If I'm heading to the Black Desert this time to fulfill my promise to help Nefertiti find her true form, the power of the Illuminati in this desert far exceeds our imagination. I can predict that this operation will not go smoothly. Perhaps my amnesia is also related to the Illuminati's ambush. Meanwhile, the power of Master Hosanai, the formation master of the School of Strategies, is even greater than imagined. For over 20 years living in Scandinavia, Loki has annually accompanied his tribe on various killing sprees. The icy and snowy conditions, coupled with lack of clothing and food, posed the mortal's extreme lack of nutrition and exhaustion, making his reactions more realistic. After the killing began, Master Hosanai withstood the pressure and sealed the girl's soul. This action may seem dangerous, but in the long run, it's the optimal solution. After easily killing the baby girl, her soul will return to the underworld, and the all-powerful Illuminati will surely organize the next spirit descent. And that next time might not happen in the Eastern Tang Dynasty, with its neighborhood watch system. Using a formation to seal the soul within the girl's body was like a permanent prison. As long as the girl remained alive, they had no way to resurrect her soul. After leaving the Eastern Tang Dynasty, Master Hosanai had no knowledge of the girl's subsequent whereabouts. From the time she fell into the hands of the legalist mentors, to her subsequent experiences, until she ended up in the carriage of the Hangchang merchants, no one knew what had happened in between. But it didn't matter. The fact was already established. Our journey deep into the Black Desert will ultimately lead to the Mia Oasis, home to the Temple of Anubis. I suggest taking the girl with us. If the Styx priests possess a method for removing the soul, It wouldn't be too late to find them and see what they do with it. Loki was waiting for these words from the scholars. For days, he had been hesitating over one question: should he follow the Hashma caravan into the Black Desert? Despite his memory loss, both Old Hash and the Byzantine scholars confirmed that 13 years ago, after leading his army to capture Paris, he now bore the title Godslayer and King of Paris, ruling over a kingdom of Normandy that encompassed the North Sea. While he didn't yet know why he was in the middle of the Black Desert, he knew that if he sent out a carrier pigeon, a large number of guards would soon arrive from Paris, traveling day and night. Then, he could simply don his imperial attire, shower his fortune with gold, and depart the city like a god. It wouldn't be that difficult. But then he thought about his own awakening in the desert, his encounter with Hash's caravan, the battle, his rescue of the girl, and his encounter with Fire Third Master hidden among the scholars. He felt as if a thin thread connected everything, though he couldn't yet pinpoint the master controlling their actions. As a second-generation man, he knew he would never act out of nowhere. His current situation must be orchestrated by someone behind the scenes. To understand the cause, he would have to re-enter the Black Desert with a Hashma caravan. What was happening before him was most likely connected to Nefertiti and the freedmen of the Deep Sahara. The Arabs in the Hashma caravan are somewhat afraid of this girl. She followed me until we entered Memphis, but there are differences between men and women, and I can't keep her chained forever. She won't eat anything, refusing to swallow anything offered to her. Your team includes several women, who would be much more capable of caring for a child than I am, but rest assured, fellow Meesters, if this creature dares to harm anyone, I promise to destroy it immediately. After handing the girl to Fire Third Master, Loki left without a backward glance. He could sense that an evil spirit resided within the East Continent girl, but now was not the time to eliminate her. It would be best if the scholars could take her with them under the guise of research. With Master Hosanai, a master of formations, in charge, the scholars' safety would be guaranteed to a certain extent. Meanwhile, Master Hosanai gazed at the girl, his shrewd eyes flickering with other thoughts. He was familiar with the legalist school. The encirclement and suppression operation in the valley 2 years ago was a crucial operation by the overseers to eliminate spies and the first direct confrontation between the legalist mentors and the Illuminati. His ultimate handling of the situation was met with considerable discontent within the school, and Master Hosanai was ultimately dismissed. But it was clear that the girl must have been under the legalist mentors' close surveillance. In Master Hosanai's eyes, her survival was incredible. He hadn't expected her to end up in Loki's hands. Each of the legalist mentors was a rare strategist. They would never make such a mistake. In Master Hosanai's eyes, this all seemed like a well-planned conspiracy. It was even possible that he himself was a pawn in this scheme. Chapter 523 Departure. The next morning, the gates of Memphis slowly opened. Under the gaze of numerous merchants, the carriages of the Hash caravan formed a long line in the center of the street. The merchants' gazes were filled with either envy or jealousy, but the Hash caravan's size was no longer the dire appearance it had been when they entered the city. His cavalry remained the same 50 men, but just 3 days after entering Memphis, Heath Brancher, a successful merchant from Constantinople, appeared to his right. He rode a pair of tall horses, followed by 4 women swathed in pale blue veil. The 20 cavalrymen, clad in full steel armor, were even more powerful than the Arab cavalry of Memphis. Encased in the veil, concubine Zu gripped 2 thin swords, held close to her arms, while her gaze drifted unnoticed toward the scholars in the nearby ranks. A crucial aspect of the legalist assassin's daily training is accurately assessing the opponent's strength. His target, the East Continent girl, had been transferred from Loki's grasp to the back of an elderly scholar. Although his aura was restrained, unlike the powerful and outward-looking chosen of the Western continent, he could still sense the considerable spiritual power hidden within him. With a killer Loki sterager lurking within his ranks, it was actually a good thing the girl wasn't in his grasp. The legalist mentors who controlled the Eastern Tang dynasty, while keeping a low profile, wielded power far beyond the imagination of many. Within just 3 days, concubine Zu's team had formulated all subsequent response strategies. She felt no panic. Third Master Ho could sense someone lurking, observing him. However, turning back, he couldn't discern the source of that piercing gaze. When the scholars went out, they uniformly wore hooded cloaks emblazoned with a citadel emblem. Their presence drew the gazes of many Western Continent residents from Memphis. After this period of rapid growth, the Meesters continuously synthesized the technological advances developed within the citadel, significantly improving the lives of the residents of the western continent. Merchants began to possess faster three-masted ships, and the fusion of eastern and western foraging techniques gave farmers more efficient agricultural tools, more mechanically sound wheels, and more productive and drought-resistant plant seeds. None of these achievements came from the gods, but from mortals like themselves. The Meisters saved us before. Are they here to save the freedmen this time? I think it's quite possible. Do you remember the terrible plague that struck the Byzantine Empire 9 years ago? Our limited priests were powerless to save the city's sick, and ultimately we relied on the potions prepared by the Meisters. I hope the Meisters can uncover the truth about the events in the desert tribes. If only our clients could return, I would even embrace science as a religion. Merchants with a bit of common sense, upon encountering the scholars, would do their utmost to show respect to these devout researchers. Standing at the city gate, many shop owners who had just opened their doors were talking in low voices, tapping their foreheads with their fingers, silently praying for the scholar's journey. Master Hosan looked at the girl from Donglu sitting behind him. Last night, he had mixed cinnabar and reinforced the sealing array on the girl's body. Under this double seal, the violent evil spirit in the girl's body was greatly suppressed, and the black mist floating on her body had completely disappeared. The girl now looked confused and helpless, not much different from a normal child. Seeing that the girl seemed uncomfortable sitting behind him, Master Hosan picked her up and laid her down in front of him, guarding her in his arms. Save people to the end, send the Buddha to the West. 5 years ago, I took the initiative to save your life. Now we can meet again, which means you and I are destined to be together. No god can deprive the citizens of the Tang dynasty of the right to reincarnate. After a few days, I'll find the group of soul-playing priests and see if there's a way to completely eliminate the ancient god's soul in you, so that you, like everyone else, will have a worthwhile life on earth. The 5-year-old girl's eyes sparkled, her skin gleaming with a new glow from the abundant food. She uttered a few unfamiliar characters, perhaps expressing gratitude in her own way. At the rear of the group, Loki, atop a tall warhorse, led the charge. Everyone had heard of him, but few had ever seen him in person. After entering the city, the story of Frost Giant King Loki's battle with the Illuminati was still a popular topic of conversation. Loki had shed his luxurious, dirty clothes and donned a linen robe, a lightweight pullover typically worn by Arabs. This lightweight, hooded garment not only protected him from the scorching sun but also effectively conserved moisture. The myriad strange circumstances in Memphis, coupled with the inexplicable loss of his memories, the mysterious girl, and the even more enigmatic formation master, Master Hosan I, could not possibly have brought them together in the same caravan by some ethereal luck. Loki was almost certain he was part of a vast and complex conspiracy. The Illuminati's enemies were far more than just him. Who is the mastermind behind this conspiracy? Was it a plot orchestrated by the Illuminati to achieve a specific objective? Or was it a conspiracy orchestrated by one of their enemies to counter this vast organization? His extensive memory loss made it impossible to determine the true nature of his foe. All he could do now was to remain immersed in the situation, taking one step at a time, and enter the Free People's territory in search of clues about Nefertiti at 5 a.m. The first rays of sunlight began to appear in the deep blue sky, and the sunrise over the endless sea of sand had begun. Facing the rising sun, Old Hassi and all the porters, laborers, and knights from the Arab Empire around him knelt on the spot. With arms outstretched, they recited the prayer that every adventurer from their homeland must recite before setting out. Praise the Cinder King. Muhammad Hash is the name of this group. Agnes the Unburnt is my only true God. Today, your followers will surrender to the flames. If anything unexpected happens on the road, we will turn into firewood to light up future generations. Dingling, dingling, facing the dazzling morning sun. When the gate was completely open, Has led the lead horse out of the town, and this huge camel caravan finally walked into the endless sea of sand. Chapter 524 Desert Walking. After leaving the city under the rising sun, the group immediately entered the boundless desert. Just a few hundred meters outside Memphis, the road vanished completely. The province of Egypt was now occupied by the Arab Empire. As of 2021 AD, Egypt's official name remained the Arab Republic of Egypt. The Abbasid family's imprint on this land, dating back to 639 AD, continued to resonate over 1,000 years later. While the Arab Empire nominally controlled all of Egypt, its control in reality was limited to the short stretch between Alexandria on the Mediterranean and Memphis. Beyond Memphis, the vast expanse was devoid of troops and roads. All that could be seen was an endless expanse of shifting yellow sand and a relentless, scorching breeze. The Hashma caravan now numbered nearly 100, with over 100 carriages. When they lined up neatly on the streets of Memphis, the procession stretched for 3 city blocks. However, once outside the city and into the desert, their group was like a needle in a vast ocean, practically lost in the vast sand. If this desert were easily accessible, no merchant guild would be willing to open shop in Memphis. High taxes and labor costs would wipe out 70% of a merchant guild's profits, a significant sum that adds up to, but this desert is so dangerous that no merchant guild would venture forth. Brother, have you noticed? Since we left the city, this incessant scorching wind hasn't stopped. The dunes and terrain we see may look completely different tomorrow. Anyone who dares to enter this desert must possess not only courage but also a unique method of navigating the desert. Boss Hash, who can consistently make a living here, is no ordinary man. After 3 days, the scholars quickly became familiar with Loki. They discovered that this axe-carrying Viking wasn't like his compatriots, obsessed with women and gold. His vast knowledge often amazed the scholars, and the accompanying scholars became increasingly convinced that the rumors spread by the firebearers were likely true. This emperor, too, possessed a soul that didn't belong to this era. The young scholar Loki was speaking with was named Hans Welsh, from the Kingdom of Wales in the English Isles. To have a country's name attached to his surname meant this young man's background was certainly remarkable. Over the course of 2 days of conversation, Loki learned that the current Earl of Wales, Charlemagne Welsh, was his uncle. 13 years prior, when Loki captured Paris, the Duchy of France was divided. The fertile land immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding wolves, and King Egbert of Wessex immediately contacted all 7 rulers. Hearing that they could overthrow France, which had long dominated them, the 7 rulers cast aside their differences and united. After 3 years of war, 7 provinces of the Duchy of France fell to the combined forces of Vikings and English. By now, the 7 kingdoms of England had long been united into the New England region, under the Kingdom of Normandy commanded by Loki. The Duke of New England was none other than Egbert, the same duke who had fought Loki 14 years prior. The former enemy, now his subordinate. Loki had no memory of this, but upon hearing it, he felt it was highly likely true. He had a clear understanding of his own abilities. A life of slaughter had destined him to be a formidable warrior, capable of leading his men to capture cities and territories with his tenacious fighting spirit. But managing a vast kingdom in the Middle Ages was a task simply impossible for a time traveler born in a remote and freezing land. Historically, nations ruled by warriors often did not end well. The Yuan dynasty, founded by the Mongol cavalry, conquered vast territories but lasted only 97 years. The invincible Li Zicheng, king of the rebellion, spent only 28 days in the Forbidden City before returning to battle and dying. Egbert was ambitious and capable. He was able to make Wessex stand out among the 7 kingdoms, even treating the other 6 as puppet states. He was no ordinary man. Later historical texts repeatedly mentioned him as the one who ended the 7 kingdoms of England. In this life, I unknowingly helped him achieve this achievement. I wonder if it was a coincidence. Be careful and don't get too far away from each other, Loki said, turning to the chatty scholar beside him. Old Hash once specifically mentioned that many merchants have disappeared in this desert recently. He suspects they were most likely killed by bandits. Old Hash's assessment is not groundless. The bandits roaming the outskirts of the Black Desert are one of the greatest threats to the caravan merchants. Where there are people, there are gangs, a saying that holds true regardless of era. The bandits operating outside the Black Desert include not only freemen but also bandits and pirates from the Visigothic, Avar, and Bulgar kingdoms. They live in caves far from the city, often dressed in finery, sneaking into Memphis to gather intelligence. Upon learning of the caravan's departure, informants release carrier pigeons to contact the bandits in the caves. The bandits, masked and mounted on 12 war horses, follow the caravan, ready to plunder at any moment. In the past 3 months, Hash's caravan has been the largest caravan merchant group to leave the city, bar none. It was almost inevitable that they would attract attacks from desert bandits. The reason was simple. The decline in traveling merchants meant the bandits had no source of income. Now, having finally caught a lucrative opportunity to escape the city, one could imagine how many hungry bandits would roam the desert like wolves. For this reason, Old Hash made an exception and opted not to purchase camels, instead continuing to use horses to pull his vehicles. To facilitate rapid cavalry patrols along the road from Alexandria to Memphis, the Arab Empire's governor of the northern continent had built a simple, horse-friendly road along the Nile River. Shoe-shod horses could trot swiftly along this route, ensuring the caravans could reach Memphis quickly. However, the desert outside Memphis was completely roadless, and the scorching, soft sand was far more suitable for camels. Furthermore, camels far outlasted ordinary horses in their ability to withstand hunger and drought. Old Hash, even at the expense of storing food and water, chose to continue taking horses out of the city for a single reason: horses were far more suited to combat than camels. Once the purebred tall horses from the French duchy were running, they could reach speeds 5 times faster than camels. The powerful impact of the horses allowed weapons to penetrate the body more smoothly. Once they encountered the desert bandits, everyone mounted their horses, and the Hash horse gang instantly transformed into a cavalry of nearly 100 men. This was a formidable force in the desert. Perhaps only in this way could they break free from the bandits' attacks. Old Hash rode cautiously at the front of the group. Every few dozen steps, he would pull out his binoculars and carefully examine the sand dunes on the horizon. He knew that the bandits' targets were mostly traveling merchants just out of the city. They wouldn't be far from Memphis. They were bound to appear before sunset on the first day. However, when the sun set and the Hash horse gang arrived at their first stop, there was still no sign of a single figure on the horizon. This filled Old Hash with a profound sense of unreality. The dwindling number of free citizens, the disappearance of the bandits, and the day's fearful march felt like a punch poised to strike soft cotton. Every caravan of merchants had its own base. Old Hash's first night's roost was in a rather hide-and-abandoned mine. This was a fortified tunnel, carved thousands of years ago by slaves digging sand to make cement. The first day's journey was filled with strangeness, so much so that Old Hash made an exception that night and doubled the number of sentries guarding the mine. However, the entire night passed. Not only were there no sand bandits, but even the sand foxes and coyotes that often haunted the caves were nowhere to be seen. Chapter 525 Desert Walking, 2. In other parts of the world, desert travelers mostly choose to travel at night. Exercising in the heat consumes extra energy, and the biggest fear during such times is losing too much water. Exposing yourself to the scorching sun during the day is like us coastal dwellers drying salted fish. Without plenty of fresh water, within 3 days, the unfortunate traveler will perish from thirst in the yellow sand, but this desert is an exception. The next morning, as Loki opened his eyes, the chatterbox Mr. Huntswelsh began his performance again. This man seemed to have a unique gift for spouting seemingly useful, yet ultimately meaningless nonsense. Not to mention his severe social incompetence. While the others in the group maintained a certain degree of fear towards Loki, the god of death, only Hans came over immediately upon opening his eyes. The free folk call this Jeddah the Black Desert because the fine sand here is different from other deserts. Hans grabbed a handful of sand from the ground, and Loki realized it wasn't the sand he remembered. The sand covering Scandinavia's endless beaches resembles tiny rock crystals. But the sand in this desert is as fine and soft as talcum powder. The constant flow of hot winds daily easily lifts this sand high into the air, where it circulates in the air, forming sandstorms and returning it to the ground. Your Majesty, you are truly wise. You instantly grasped my meaning. Sand as fine as flour cannot reflect moonlight at night. No one dares to travel through the deep sands of the Sahara Desert at night. This is precisely because the desert ground reflects no light at all. Even with a torch, you can't see the path beneath your feet. Walking through this desert at night is like walking on an endless expanse of pitch-black crude oil. During a sandstorm, the world becomes pitch black, so deep that you can't even see your hand in front of you. Even gods would be lost in such darkness. Despite being a chatterbox, this Huntswelsh's endless scientific exposition surprisingly didn't offend the crowd. Instead, many porters and laborers from the Hashma gang gathered around him to listen to his explanation of why fine sand grains, made of crystals and solid rock, can reflect light. This scholar reminded Loki of Father Francis, who was currently nowhere to be found. It's undeniable that every organization needs a businessman with both eloquence and audacity. 16 years ago, when Loki first crossed the seas to the kingdom of Northumbria and met Jerome, while Jerome expressed skepticism about Archbishop Francis's character, he was undeniably the pillar of the Church of the Holy Fathers in Cheshire. The entire church relied on his unscrupulous operations and his skillful deception to amass such wealth. Hans Welsh was a similar figure. As a fellow meester, his mission wasn't research, but rather to promote science as a new faith through his eloquence and charisma. Capturing others' interest was crucial. The Citadel's greatest enemy was the Church of the Holy Fathers, with its 800-year-old heritage. Faith and science offered nothing. But faith in the Holy Fathers drew power directly from the hand of the Holy Lord. They were engaged in a battle of unequal strength. Given their inherent disadvantage, the meesters needed to use their ingenuity even more to survive this war. The next day, Old Hash still wasn't moving at full speed. From sunrise in the east to sunset in the west, Hash's caravan had only advanced 70 kilometers. Every once in a while, he would climb a sand dune and carefully observe the hilltops with his binoculars. Maybe I was just slow yesterday. Even if I were slower, the bandits would still appear. A bulk merchant like me carrying so much cargo, they'd have to be blind to let me go. Even before leaving the city, Old Hash had already anticipated the bandits' inevitable appearance. They had numerous spies in Memphis, each of whom was constantly monitoring the caravan's departures. Upon sighting them, they would immediately relay information via carrier pigeons. With enough combat power within his caravan, and with the god of death, Loki, their presence was a surefire way to slaughter the bandits. However, if these hungry wolves chose to attack all at once, the caravan would undoubtedly suffer significant casualties in both horses and men. It was for this reason that Old Hash hadn't carried much food or water. He had calculated that more than half the men would die within 2 days of leaving the city. Having traversed the desert for so many years, Old Hash had rarely miscalculated, but this time he had to admit that his predictions had been drastically wrong. And every mistake has its price. On the third day, it was time to repay his debt. The horses Old Hash had brought with him to fight the desert bandits were completely useless. After just 3 days, they had become a huge burden. Military horses consume far more water than camels, which are adapted to the desert. They have an unparalleled advantage in short bursts of sprinting, but they are not good at long-distance travel. After only 3 days of marching out of the city, nearly 100 people had already consumed a quart of fresh water for drinking and cooking, and the next water source was another 3 days' journey away. The ever-present sense of crisis still lingered in his mind. This journey was so bizarre that Old Hash acted decisively and ordered the slaughter of the 2 horses pulling the empty cart. The horse meat was harvested for food, and the bones were abandoned in the desert. This would reduce the consumption of horse fodder and fresh water. When a person is sufficiently alert, they tend to view everything around them with a critical eye. During this time, Old Hash noticed something strange about the brothel owner, Heath Brancher. His demeanor and everyday actions perfectly matched his personality, yet, as Hash's horse gang butchered the war horses, he sat by, puffing on his pipe, his eyes drifting to the distant horizon, oblivious to the horses wailing in a pool of blood. The same was true of the 2 women shrouded in plain gauze who followed him. As merchants who had lived in the city for a long time, weren't their reactions to bloody scenes sometimes a bit too relaxed? Old Hash knew the Byzantine merchants and nobles like the back of his hand. Most of them would only commit a single killing, swatting a mosquito or a fly. Having never even experienced the slaughter of a chicken, they didn't consider the bloody scene, but simply turned a blind eye. He appeared before me like a timely help, providing money, manpower, and even connecting the scholars to the Styx priests. No matter how you think about it, such a coincidence shouldn't happen in the world. When mortals are extremely nervous, they subconsciously doubt everything around them. Looking at Heath, the seeds of doubt were planted in his heart for the first time. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.